Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the death and life of Erza Scarlet in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Tutoring and Graduation. Step back. Everyone step back, 10 yards at the least. The 73rd bout between Scarlet and Sentry is about to begin. The combatants will face each other, await the signal, and then fight. Today's choice of weapons: bare fists and legs. No cheating, no low blows, no other weapons. Whoever steps outside the circle loses. Otherwise, the fight goes on until one participant can no longer stand or we run out of time, and God help us, we don't want Sensei chewing us out again. Resolutely, Erza slammed her fist into her palm. It sounded so weirdly formal, for something that had been almost intimate at first, her and Rod, settling their differences with violence. Rod had had a bone to pick with her from day one, and likewise had she not tolerated his rough, domineering attitude. So they'd taken it outside during weekends, or free time, they'd taken to battling it out, man to well, violent person to violent person. And naturally, news of it had spread like wildfire, because students are among the worst gossips in the known universe. And nothing attracts a crowd, it seemed, like a good old-fashioned fight. Already at the second time they fought, there had been an audience, one that had only grown since. People were bustling about, quietly murmuring with the excitement that doing something that was against the rules did, because this was against school regulation most decidedly, but Erza suspected the teachers knew already, with the gleeful anticipation of spectators knowing they were about to witness something that was dangerous, but not for they themselves. The chatter, though, was as naught for Erza, as she faced Rod Sentry with a grin. He himself stared back at her, his eyes looking as deceivingly tired as ever. "Is it 73 already?" he drawled, balling his fists and stretching his fingers out again, preparing for the fight to come. "Sod me, don't time pass fast? What's the score now? 31 wins for me, 30 for you and 12 draws." She balled her fists, taking a stance, and the crowd cheered as loudly as it dared without possibly alerting a teachers. "Then let's even the score out, why don't we?" Rod said, his voice low. He raised his fists, legs spread wide and arms raised high. Quickly he lunged forward, striking rapidly, jabbing, feinting. By now, it was a dance Erza was well accustomed to. She knew his style, and he knew hers. He had been a good training partner, in a sense where Erza was tall and statuesque, with a full form and strong muscles. Rod was short and wiry, and fast. Fighting somebody smaller was quite challenging. You'd think the bigger reach would have been an advantage, but as he had once explained, a short fighter has nothing but experience in fighting people bigger than themselves. He pushed her back, slamming a roundhouse on her that she just barely blocked with an arm, and quickly, she threw his leg off, counter-attacking, jabbing him in the face. And of course, he dodged, somersaulting backwards, landing on his feet easily. It was always like this, neither quite able to really hurt the other hand to hand. Erza had an edge with a sword, he had one in shunpo, and in hand to hand they were evenly matched. Rod spat, and gave her a condescending glare, gesturing for her to come at him. A provocative gesture, of course not something she'd be goaded by. But charge she did, striking rapidly. Rod, of course, countering flawlessly, patiently waiting for an opening. And finally, through her barrage of blows, he found a way past her guard, slamming a fist into her gut. She recovered quickly, before it could become a sequence, and stepped back. And once again, Erza found herself smiling. It had long since stopped being about teaching a bully a lesson, really. Rivalry was the official reason for this, but somehow Erza just found this fun. So far, Rod was the only one in her year who was anything like a match for her, and training with him was stimulating. And something about the bruises she got, despite the ache that came with them, felt satisfying. And Rod had turned out not to be such a bully after all. He'd been rough and blunt, but it had seemed his problem was that he just didn't like rich people very much. Coming from a poor district, that was understandable enough. And somehow, after over 70 fights, she almost thought of him as a friend. She doubted he knew that, but it was still true. Erza was snapped out of her reveries by a fist connecting with her face, followed up by 2 hard jabs into her ribs. She collapsed onto one knee, and only barely caught an axe kick coming down. Roaring back at Rod, she pushed back, overbalancing him. Quickly getting up on her feet, she bull rushed him, keeping him off balance. Rod went into a roll, getting up on his feet, but Erza was there, headbutting him. He staggered back, but quickly came back with an uppercut and Erza went reeling back. And now the two of them were again battered, bruised, and equally as stubbornly set on continuing until neither could move. Or when the bell rang and recess was over. And, as it happened, that exact thing happened, the bell sounding resolutely. Erza was almost ready to keep going anyway, but Marissa, who kept saying this was barbaric, yet seemed to be there every time, and Sensuk each put a hand on her shoulder. "Kman," Ramon said, still standing at the sidelines. "I know you got your blood fired up, but it'll ignite and burn if we're late for Shimura-sensei's class." Huffing, recovering herself a bit, Erza stopped moving. "Damn," she said, resting her hands on her knees. "Was it 20 minutes already?" 25. Marissa said, sighing. "Which means we really have to hurry, or you'll spend 5 hours in detention." That thought did not appeal to Erza very much, and she stood upright. Still, time issues aside, she took a look at Rod. "Another bloody draw, huh?" he grumbled. "You're damn persistent, you red-headed little shit." Erza grinned. Once she might have seen that talk as insult, but by now it was just jargon, rough talk without much meaning. "Who are you calling little, midget?" she shot back, holding back a giggle. "I'll take you on any time, you know that. You'll get your chance to break even." Rod nodded, and there was the smallest hint of a smile on his face, the corners of his mouth just barely upturned. "We're on for this weekend, then. Wouldn't miss it. Same place. Same place, same people, and of course, this is the time where you bite the dust once and for all." Erza laughed. "I heard that one before, but well, I have to go. Later." Hurrying off, Erza followed Marissa and Sensuk, rushing off to class. She only barely made it, and got a strict look from Shimura-sensei, but it was worth it. After a demanding kendo class, with Shinpeika Shimura-sensei shouting orders to everyone and everything, it was time for Kido. And while the lack of a drill sergeant-esque teacher was welcome enough, everything else about the subject was still alien to her. After over 6 months, she could still only just barely form a basic Kido, and the higher-level incantations were murder. It was like trying to do quantum mathematics while juggling porcelain plates, which made it all the more irritating to see Marissa and Sensuk both handle it so easily. She was not of a jealous kind, of course, but she hated the feeling of helplessness before the subject, of feeling like she couldn't actually do something. That had been the harshest thing. She had always had confidence in herself that she could do whatever she wanted to. The logical part of her brain knew, of course, that this was not literally true, but still, she'd come here with the notion that she could really do this, really come through. And Kido was grinding that confidence to paste. It was so subtle it required you to master Ryotsu control, and warp that into another kind of energy entirely, and then restructure it into a large, complex spell. Her teacher, Aizen-sensei, kept telling her she was flooding too much energy into every spell, that she had what it took, that it was her basic control that was the problem. Which wasn't really reassuring. She was good at using a sword. Sometimes she wished that's all she'd ever have to do. "Scarlet." The calm, gentle voice of Aizen-sensei snapped her out of her self-pitying daydreaming. "Please demonstrate Hada number 4. There was a range, set up in the classroom, for the occasion of target practice, though most of their current tutelage was focused on the basics of controlling Kido. They had only just hit the actual spells themselves. Number 4 was Byakurai, a simple lightning spell. Simple, of course, being a relative term. "Yes, sir," she said, standing up. Immediately, the people close to her moved away. Her inability to control Kido had become known by now, and a Hada could be quite volatile. Irritated, she pointed her fingers at one of the targets, and summoned the energy. Carefully, she visualized the magic she had to control, building the spell up. "Hada number 4, Byakurai," she said boldly, and for a second she felt the energy flow out from her center, into her arm and out through her finger, and for an instant it just seemed to work. And then, of course, it went badly. The lightning discharged, around her finger and back into her body. She cried out with pain, held back a swear, and instinctively tried to force the energy away. In an instant, it again focused in her finger. And then it exploded. It wasn't the most dramatic of explosions, just a small puff and a bit of smoke, leaving her with singed eyebrows, but it was enough to knock her off her feet and back into her chair. God damn it. That will do, Scarlet. Aizen-sensei said, and she could hear a few sniggers. Everybody liked to see others fail, it seemed, especially if it was somebody who was already doing well. Next, Akajima-kun. Her teacher called out a new name, and she watched with frustration as the student fired off a rocky, but functional, Byakurai spell. She clenched her fist. Class eventually passed, at an agonizingly slow pace, in the typical irony of time spent doing things you hate always passing slower than time spent doing what you love. But eventually, class was dismissed, and the students walked out in as orderly a fashion as orderly could be without being a rushed mess of people eager to be elsewhere. Waiting for most of them to walk away, Erza finally stood up, frowning. Kido was a disaster, and after this, there was history, literature. School life was hard. Annoyingly hard. Miss Scarlet. Erza blinked, and turned around. It was Aizen-sensei. Yes, sensei. Great, now she was going to be chewed out, too. I noticed you're not doing well. Well. Yes, definitely a lecture. Great. Yeah. She grumbled. Might as well get it over with. How long is it till your next class? She blinked. Half an hour, sensei. Aizen-sensei smiled. Well, if you don't object, I think I could use some of that time getting you up to speed. How about it? You mean, it's up to you. But I am confident that one-on-one, I could help you work out whatever kinks there are. Well, it didn't seem like a lecture, at least, that was always a plus. Sure. I mean, yes, sensei. Come with me, he said, walking back to his podium. He took a seat beside it, pulling out a chair. He gestured for Erza to sit down. Uncertain, she sat down at the front row, not sure what to expect. I know you're strong, he said. You are a very capable person, Miss Scarlet, as I am sure you must think too. I don't, she said, lamely trying to protest he teacher's praise. There's no shame in admitting to talent, he said dismissively. But likewise, there's no shame in admitting to your weaknesses, to recognizing your limitations and asking for help in overcoming them. Does that make sense to you? Sure. She mumbled. Yeah, sure, I agree. That makes sense. He nodded. I think it does. So, what do you think your problem is? Well, she hesitated, thinking a bit. It's when I try to form my magic dash. No, not that. He shook his head. It runs a little deeper than that. The question is, what is your problem, student? Erza frowned. Was this going to be a lecture after all? I don't understand dash. When you study, what is it that stops you? I had a look at your other subjects. You excel in hand-to-hand and kendo, and you score passable grades in literature and history. I don't believe you are a simpleton with an aptitude only for violence. Which, by deduction, means that something else is holding you back. In my experience as a teacher, it's often in your head. Now tell me, am I wrong or am I right? Erza sighed. It's hard. And I'm not used to this kind of hard. I mean, it's really, really hard. And when I try and fail, over and over, it feels like I can't do it. She trailed off. And then you have a vicious circle, where you keep failing because you lost the motivation to try. Aizen-sensei nodded. I've seen this before, believe me. And some students are just that, failures. Roughly 4% cannot graduate. And Kido is one of the major subjects a student must pass, and to be honest, in the state you are now, you will not pass. Erza took in a sharp breath, for a moment feeling that sensation of a stone dropping inside her chest, of defeat. But I don't believe that is you. Aizen-sensei said gently. I believe you have everything it takes. You just need a little shove. A shove, sensei. He nodded. This is a fine school, but it misses some of the finer points of teaching. Like how each student has their own learning curve, yours is slower in this subject, and the course moved a little too fast. What I think you need is as much time as it takes, just mastering the basics, manipulating the flow of your Ryotsu, controlling your power output. That is what you have to master first. Yes, sensei. She nodded. That would be very nice. I will give you a simple exercise, he said, and reached into his pocket, retrieving a small ball of some kind. This thing absorbs spiritual energy. I want you to practice with it. How? It is simple. Here, take it. He put it in Erza's hand. It felt cool to the touch. As soon as it came in contact with her skin, it started to glow a pale blue. It takes on different colors depending on the amount of energy it takes in, he explained. Right now it's blue, meaning you're giving it a lot of energy, you're leaking Ryotsu all over the place. Concentrate, and stop all excess flow. Firmly closing her fingers around the ball, Erza focused, forcing her Ryotsu to stop like turning a valve, slowing the flow of water. It was hard, like holding your breath while jogging. Still, she forced herself into control, and the ball changed color, glowing with a dull white. That's good, Aizen-sensei said, nodding approvingly. When you can get it to glow with a faint white, it means it's getting a minimum no more than you need to expel to keep breathing, for your heart to pump blood through your veins, for your organs to work. That is what all officers do, to conserve energy. It's Erza grumbled, her control slipping, Ryotsu once again pouring out, coloring the ball an angry red. It's bloody hard. That color means you're giving it as much as it can handle. Be careful not to break it, it can only absorb so much. Slowly, the burst faded, and the blue color returned. Once you've learned to keep it at a white for 5 minutes straight, let me know. 5 minutes. She groaned. Holding it for just a few seconds was like having the wind knocked out of your lungs. Sensei. We all started with just a few seconds, Aizen-sensei said, smiling enigmatically. And we all will, everyone who matters can do it at will, all the time. It may seem impossible to you now, but with a few years of practice it becomes second nature. Erza gave him a skeptical look. You'd be surprised how many people have given me that look, he said calmly. And you'd be surprised how easy it comes with practice. Yes, sensei. Thank you, she mumbled. It is my responsibility as a teacher to look after the needs of all my students. If a student fails, and I haven't done all I can, then I am to blame as much as the student. And that I couldn't stomach, Scarlet. He looked at the clock. But I think you've friends waiting, a lesson to go to and undoubtedly short people to pummel. He smiled again. Apparently, her run-ins with Rod weren't that secret. School life went on, as it had for the last few months. She continued to be at the top of her class in Kendo, and though Shimura-sensei was harsh, her skill there seemed undeniable. She was naturally strong, too. Nobody in her class seemed to have energy like she did. She didn't feel like she learned much of anything new, though more like relearning and rediscovering things she already knew from when she was alive. Likewise, she did well in Hakuta. She was fast, could hit hard, and move with agility, and though she wasn't number one in her class, she did well enough to have cause to feel some small measure of pride. Her more scholarly subjects were passable, in no small part thanks to Marisa, Sensuke, and Ramon, the latter of which had a surprising aptitude for literature, something which had saved her more than once. In between studies, friends, and fighting, time was flying away, and before she knew it, almost a year had passed. And, despite often feeling like she had no idea what she was doing, she was slightly wiser and slightly more experienced. So I gotta ask, Sensuke said, snapping Erza out of her reflective daze, how's Kido working out? The four of them were sitting around lazily in the school garden, and a bit of good lazing was welcome in the hectic life in school, with so little time for anything but studies. She said, shaking her head. Kido is still rather difficult, it's hard. But with Aizen-sensei's help, I get by. Sort of. I'll maybe possibly eventually somehow get a passing grade. I think. Marisa smiled brightly. Of course you will. We all have subjects we're bad at. Speak for yourself. Sensuk said, and though his cockiness was mostly jest, part of it wasn't. Yours would be modesty and humility. Marissa said acerbically. Anyway, disregarding the pompous fool dash. Hey. You have to admit, she isn't wrong. Ramon said sardonically. Yeah, but still. Sensuk said, looking sour, but he wasn't fooling anyone. Self-deprecation was a comedic staple for him. Anyway, we'll all make it. We've all got decent grades. A smirk passed Marissa's lips. Her grades were far above decent, and we're doing well. We've come a long way since we first got here. We've still got years left. Erza said contemplatively. Yes. Marissa nodded. But we have to be confident. We have to believe we can do it, you know. Sensuk opened his mouth, and Marissa said. Except you. Be less confident and stop believing in yourself. I would if it were possible, but sadly I just ooze competence and self-confidence. And delusions of grandeur. Ramon cut in. A bit of delusion never hurt anybody. Sensuk exclaimed, chuckling. Say, Erza muttered. Say, did any one of you hear your sword talk yet? I mean properly, not just visions and weird echoing voices. It would be strange if we did. Sensuk said. I mean, we're first years. Building a connection takes years. Well, so Sensei says at least. He shrugged. I know a little about this, since Noble my dad has one, and it took him 2 years to learn its name, and that was considered fast. Very few people can sync with their weapon really quickly, only a few geniuses here and there. Erza sighed. I guess I'm just impatient. It's like I want it all and I want it now. I want to be strong, you know. Marissa nodded. I know. We all want more, but there's no shortcuts. As far as I know, at least. I'd take one if I could. Erza grumbled. I swear, I never had to worry about this when I was alive. Literally speaking, of course, it was true, but her memory was coming back more and more, and she remembered glorious fights as well as more tedious chores, so she hadn't much reason to complain. Then again, complaining was such a good way to vent. It'll come. Ramon said curtly. Little by little, like that ball you keep fiddling with. Yeah, Sensuk said excitedly, is that thing working out at all? I'd probably be out of keto if it weren't. Erza said plainly. Aizen-sensei, he's pretty nice. And handsome. Marissa added, smirking. Sensuk shot her a look. What? It's the glasses. Glasses are cool. Ew, gross. Sensuk said, laughing. But yeah, I guess it's true. Most teachers here are more like Shimura-sensei, and he's one of the nice ones. If you call nice making people do 40 push-ups if you miss one sword stroke. Marissa said. Don't be sour because swords aren't your strongest suit. Sensuk said cheerfully. Whatever. She grumbled. I still think those push-ups should be considered a crime against students everywhere. Erza laughed. This, sitting around with people she could call friends, people she had gotten to know, it was what she had missed the most. She still remembered in her mind the comrades she had used to live with, some, albeit, more clearly than others, but she had moved on and found friends. And as irksome as school could be, this life was becoming worthwhile. Another place, another time. Elsewhere, in the dreamscape, Erza stood once more before the mountain. She had come here many times since last, not enough to count it in dozens, but enough to make her familiar with the place. No longer did she stay half awake, seeing the landscape at the same time as the room she slept in. No longer did it come only when she was asleep. By now, she could sit down, close her eyes, concentrate and enter. She was careful not to do it when she was short of time, though these reveries could last for 10 minutes, half an hour, or 4 hours, and there was no telling when she would wake up. Sometimes she wondered if she'd ever be trapped in there for good, drawn into this ethereal, surreal world forever. But even so, she didn't hesitate. She had a mountain to climb. It had begun to be almost a ritual. She would begin to climb that rocky, remote path, riddled with rocks and roots, steep and sharp and strange. She would grab a rock, propel herself forward, walk in defiance of the howling wind and climb upwards. She'd look at the tree, and though it seemed she wasn't getting that much closer, she'd see the path behind her and realize she was almost 100 feet up. And then she'd fall off the mountainside, an unexpected gust of wind knocking her down, or a loose rock, or treacherous ground giving in under her feet, or a root tripping her. And she'd fall, hit the ground, feel the pain of her bones breaking for just a second before waking up again. And each time, she could see the footprints she had left there before, and each time she saw to it that she got one step further, just the one step, than she had before. Today was no different. Resolutely moving forward, she walked the path, heaving herself forward. The path ended at a rock's face no matter. Erza climbed the rock, struggled against its almost flat surface and the howling wind, got up, and saw that the path was still before her. Walking further, she trod carefully over a few roots. Seeing loose, gravelly ground, she spurted forward, jumping at the last second as the ground gave out under her. And just barely, she grabbed hold of the cliffside, slowly hauling herself up. She moved forward, quick as she could, avoiding one obstacle after another. Then, as she set her foot forward in new territory, she slipped, sliding to the side of the path, just barely hanging on. She felt herself sliding, the skin of her hands scraping against the rough ground. "God damn you!" she shouted angrily. "I'm not giving up here, you hear? You'll tell me who you are if I have to tear down this whole mountain for it. You're so brash." It was a voice this time, an actual voice, gentle and soft, like a woman's. The shock of hearing it made her slip, and quickly she lost her grip. "No, no, no!" she shouted. "Shit!" And then she lost her grip. And then she fell. And then she hit the ground, blood oozing from her body as it cracked against the ground. And then she sat bolt upright in her room. Damn! She was getting closer, so much closer than ever before. But these trials, they were a hell of a pest, they really were. But she had heard a voice. Not a disembodied thought, a command right into her very mind, but an actual voice spoken right next to her. She made a fist, clenching her hand hard, feeling her nails dig into her palm. That mountain, she would find her way to the top, one way or another. She'd find that dead tree, find the name of her blade. It wasn't just necessary, it was essential and doable. The mountain, though difficult, was not an insurmountable obstacle. It was a stepping stone to harmony, strength, and power. And someday, she'd get there. And in what felt like the blink of an eye, nearly 5 years had passed. Days came and went, meals were had, classes were taken, much reading was had, and more than a few bruises exchanged with Rod, but somehow, in what felt like no time at all when she looked back at the time spent, here she was, 5 years older, sitting again in Aizen-sensei's classroom just after class. They had moved on to real spells, learning and executing higher-level Kido, and just barely, Erza got by. Thoughtfully, she twirled the ball she had received years earlier, now glowing uneven, faint white. What had felt like holding your breath at first was now just a minor nuisance. Controlling her Ryotsu output took effort, but nowhere nearly what it used to. "You've come a long way, Miss Scarlet," Aizen-sensei said, smiling lightly. "Didn't I tell you would make it?" "Because of your help, Sensei," Erza said, tossing him the ball. He caught it, looking mildly surprised. "I just gave you a shove," he said dismissively. "A small push in the right direction. Once a week, most weeks, for several years. Now that's what I call a small push, Sensei." She grinned. "Are you being cheeky, Scarlet?" "Wouldn't dream of it, Sensei," she said, unashamedly pretending that cheek and her were as removed as the sky and the earth. "But I really have come a long way, haven't I? I remember a ruffian who came here, with not a care in the world for history or literature, years ago. And I'm still a ruffian by any standard, but I passed those subjects," she said proudly. 70% on history, would you believe that? You can go far when you put your mind to it. It's just that your mind is usually put elsewhere. Isn't that the truth? But at least I'm still top at the class in Kendo and Hakuda. She stood up, stretching. "Anyway, what will I be learning today, Sensei?" "Well, I don't think I can teach you more. You pushed yourself, you learned how to form Kido, how to control your spiritual energy and make it into magic, even how to perform the more complicated spells. Barely. Yes, but still. You've done it, and I don't think there is much more I can teach you. You're not a Kido type to begin with. You'll carve your path with the sword, more likely, and you can come far enough with that. Yeah, I guess that's my way. She shrugged. So I guess I'll just say, thank you, sensei. I wouldn't have passed without you. Don't mention it, he said, smiling lightly. But you better prepare, the graduation ceremony will come soon. I have time. He shook his head. You're young, you should spend your time with your friends. All this pesky, dusty teaching is over and done with. You should celebrate, not waste more time with your teacher. I wouldn't call it wasted, Erza said seriously. It was hard, but I guess I'll miss it, a bit. You've been a good teacher, and now I won't see you anymore. There was a look on his face, odd and with slight amusement, and he said, somehow, I am confident we'll see each other again. Run along now, I too have preparations to make. Not being one to not take a hint, Erza began walking out. Bye, Aizen-sensei. Farewell, Scarlet. Until we meet again. Until then. And with that, Erza walked out. What a strange 5 years it had been since she came here. She had been ripped from all her friends, everything that mattered to her. She had been alone and she had kept going. She wasn't one to toot her own horn, but in the privacy of her own mind, she felt proud of herself. She had a goal, she was moving forward, getting stronger, she had made new friends. And maybe, given what she knew about Shinigami duties, she could one day find her old friends again. A thought occurred to her, as she walked slowly through the school corridors. Could she possibly come back, one day, go back to her old life and stay there? She knew the Godai wasn't exactly approving of what would effectively be treason, but it might be worth it. Maybe. Or maybe not. She shook her head, no point in getting ahead of herself. And for once, her thoughts weren't interrupted this time. She saw her friends coming, all in high spirits. Ramon, for once not looking sour, just smiling slightly. Marisa, looking happy in an unrestrained sort of way, and so was Sensuke. Joining them, she walked towards the hall where the graduation ceremony was going to be held. Time really flies, doesn't it? She mumbled. Speak for yourself, Sensuke said cheerily. These were the slowest 5 years ever, but they do feel shorter than you'd think, don't they? Well, who cares? Marisa said. Soon, we'll be out there. Once we've applied for a division, we'll get to be real soldiers, finally carry that sword. You like it more than you thought, no? Ramon chimed in. Maybe, Marisa said cheekily. Anyways, let's hurry, we've got a ceremony to attend. The hall was jam-packed when they got there, all students in their year standing in lines facing a podium, in the largest hall in the school. There was a preference for pomp and grandeur, Erza had noticed, especially in really official contexts. This, of course, was the most official context possible in this school, and more than a few teachers seemed pleased, very pleased. Up front they all stood, and among them she could see Shimura-sensei and Aizen-sensei. After taking their places, and waiting for 10-odd minutes, listening to the murmurs going through the crowd, there was suddenly a rustling, and one teacher called for silence very loudly. At that, all heads, one by one, turned towards the entrance of the room, and there were a few excited whispers before the crowd finally went silent. Erza looked to where the rest looked, and saw it walking through the door was the unmistakable figure of Yamamoto Shigekuni Genryusai, whose picture she had seen in books and portraits all over the school, the venerable founder of the Godai and its commander-in-chief, the highest authority under the Central 46. He carried a cane, a very large one, and wore a haori with the symbol for one on it. His head was bald, but his beard, which was enormous, compensated for that considerably. The entire crowd watched him in awe, as he walked up to the podium, flanked by 2 ranked officers. There was something about him. He had the face of a very old man, but nothing about his posture or aura showed anything like weakness. This was the commander-in-chief, the greatest of them all, about to speak to them. The students looked in fascination, and Erza couldn't help but feel impressed. Yamamoto took his place at the podium, standing tall. He opened his mouth, and spoke with a voice that was gruff, strong, and very ancient. "Students of this academy, I salute you." He cleared his throat a little. "You have no doubt been told much about glory, duty, honor, obedience, and valor in your 5 years here. And make no mistake, you are about to become fully fledged soldiers of the Godi 13, where you will be expected to lay down your lives in service of order, balance, and tradition at a moment's notice. This is no job for weaklings, it is a privileged position afforded to the strong men and women with the determination and strength to die for what is right, but much better live for it. Rest assured, your lives will not be thrown away by the dozen, but you must always be aware of the risk that comes with your positions, the price you pay for the privileges you receive. You are all special, the strongest, the brightest, the most skilled, selected for a duty no others can perform. Yet at the same time, each and every single one of you is nothing next to this eternal institution, every one of you little more than a straw in a field. You have power, so most of all, you must be humble. We live to serve. I have laid down all my life in servitude of this place, and so will you. Those of you who follow this are already heroic, and those who don't will be remembered as cowards and traitors. Walk forward through your new life, boldly and decisively, and do what you know is right, and good things shall come your way." He looked around the room, scrutinizing the students. "Congratulations," he grumbled. "You are all Shinigami now, soldiers of the afterlife and mediators between this world and that of the living. It is a charge that is sacrosanct, so do not fail it. Never fall short of doing your best." He slammed his cane in the floor, and as one the students cheered, shouting in approval. Erza joined in. It felt good. She was part of something bigger for now, at least. These 5 years had moved her forward, all that dull Kido hadn't been for nothing. With that, Yamamoto stepped down from the podium, and began to walk out. The students kept cheering until well after he left, and all but complete chaos erupted for a few minutes. A good, cheerful kind of chaos, relief of worries pent up for years letting go, moving on. That night they celebrated, like all of the students did. The 4 of them went out, and while Erza wasn't one for heavy drinking herself, she indulged in just a few drinks of sake. They sat, they danced, they talked, and cheered and sang, and danced some more, forgetting everything else. Sure, there would be troubles ahead, there would be a long road full of struggle and strife and mundaneness as well as horrors, but here and now they were just merry, in high spirits, forgetful of everything else. That was the way of things. Erza supposed you just had to forget sometimes, just be happy to make life feel good. After a few hours, Erza decided to take a break from the loud little bar they'd been in. She needed fresh air, and just a little time by herself to take it all in, being a Shinigami, having come this far everything. She walked out, leaving the noise behind her. It was a comforting noise, one of happiness and joy, one that reminded her of home, but you could have too much of a good thing. She looked up at the sky, feeling the cool night breeze against her warm skin. It was a clear night, and the stars were shining down on her. Even here, the celestial bodies could be seen. How much like life wasn't this afterlife, after all? She turned her head and looked, and down the street she saw a familiar figure. It was Rod, sitting on a bench with an apathetic expression. Feeling curious, she walked up to him. "Why are you sitting out here?" she asked. "Shouldn't you be in there, with the rest of us?" "Can't be arsed," Rod mumbled. "Sure you can," she said resolutely. "Come on, if there's any time you shouldn't be by yourself, it's now. Come on in, celebrate with your friends." "What friends?" he grumbled. "I'm not." He gave her a strange, somewhat hostile look. "You? Well, that's a pretty non-specific insult," she said cheerfully. "I mean all friendly. Popular. I'm alone, and well, could be worse." Erza sighed. "It can't be helped, I guess." Quickly, she grabbed Rod by the wrist, and pulled him up, dragging him with her. "Hey!" he protested. "God damn it, what do you think you're doing? Taking you back in. If you've got no friends, then you'll just have to celebrate with us. We're not bad people, even though we're popular." Rod broke free, jerking his hand away. "I don't want pity, Scarlet. Don't you dash. That's good, because I'm not giving you any," she said, cutting him off before he could continue. I just don't think you should celebrate alone. Come in, have a drink. You don't have to talk, or laugh, or be cheery if you really don't want to. You can even keep that frown that makes people think you're an unrepentant thug. Or you could lighten up, and have a good time. The choice is yours. Either way, you're coming with me. He blinked. You're not letting go of this, huh? Nope. She said cheerfully. So are you coming, or am I gonna have to beat you into the dirt first? Fuck off. He mumbled. Fine, but only for 5 minutes. 5 minutes will be fine. She said, smiling brightly. That night, they all drank and were merry, and at the end, one of the loudest singers were Rod himself. It was a good night. In the following week or so, there was some downtime, nothing but free time for a whole 7 days, which was more than she'd seen in a long time, 5 years, to be specific. The official purpose was choosing what division to apply for, and the administrative process took time enough to leave them with more free time than they'd known in a long while. Most took the time to relax, to sleep in and have fun, getting applications out of the way as quickly as possible. Erza was not quite so hasty. She had taken a look at the various divisions and specific duties they carried out. On the whole, most of them were pretty similar, although there were subtle differences in how each squad seemed to approach their duty. 2nd Division, for example, had a frightening amount of talk about mortality rates and readiness to die for the cause. 3rd Division's papers seemed to emphasize humility, nothing major, it seemed. She had been indecisive. Going through all of these papers, there was a form to fill out for each division, information about the divisions, and all of it of course was written to sound more appealing than it probably was, and nothing really caught her eye until she saw Division 11. It was a simple description: fight, fight, and fight. Make your way with the sword. Obey the captain, take flak from nobody, be strong. It was simple, but honest. She asked a few others about it, and had gotten some terrified responses. 11th was known as a division of punks and hooligans, unrefined thugs who cared only for battle. It reminded her a little of Natsu and Fairy Tale. There were so many happy-go-lucky hooligans there, so many people who fought their hardest, wrecked things along the way, and lived life as they pleased. It might not be exactly the same, but it appealed to her well enough. In the end, she made her choice. Papers were filed and arrangements were made. She would officially become part of Division 11 if she was accepted. All in all, only one thing remained. They had all graduated, but to truly be a Shinigami, one had to do some Shinigamiing, and that was the final rite of passage. Her entire year, divided into teams, would go on patrol in the world of the living and potentially face real hollows, under the supervision of an officer. The week eventually ended, and as it came, she found herself, along with her class, standing before 4 instructors, real soldiers of the Godai. They were heading out. Finally, she and everyone else would test what good their training was. Chapter 7, We Are the Hunters. Attention! Graduate Class 4B, stand to attention. Straighten your damn backs, tuck your shirts in, look smart, or I will personally feed you to aminos. Erza couldn't suppress a small smile, as she and the rest of her class stood to attention. They had graduated, and all of them had applied for different squads, but the process took some time, and the Godai, not believing in anything like prolonged times of idleness, had set up an exercise, a real patrol, out in the world of the living. And before them was 7th Seed Hazeyama of the 7th Division, followed by 3 other seated officers, making ready to open a portal. Hazeyama was a grim, tough kind of man, but his drill sergeant act was a little too over the top to take very seriously. You may all have graduated, he rumbled, a very good rumble, she noted, but as far as we're all concerned, you lot are greenhorns. Stupid, ignorant children who'd probably sooner cut off their own head if they tried using a sword for real. So, how do we fix that? One unfortunate classmate piped up. That was a rhetorical question, soldier. Hazeyama snapped. You speak when spoken to, understood? The class was silent, seemingly not sure of what to say. I said, is that understood? Sir, yes sir. They shouted, not quite uniformly. You've got a long way to go. Hazeyama muttered. This will be your first patrol, a real one, out in the world of the living. This is the real thing, not a sodding exercise, not make-believe, not slaying dolls or cutting each other with fake swords. You are soldiers now, and if you ignore protocols, if you don't follow orders, you could wind up dead. Questions. Where will we be going? Erza said. And will there be hollows? Don't sound so eager. Hazeyama said sullenly. Since you're new, we're going on patrol somewhere not so densely populated. Mongolia, the humans call it. There will be a small town not too far away, so hollows could pop up, but it's not a high-risk area. If they do pop up, remember your training, and whatever you do, don't try to be a hero. Being a soldier means fighting to live another day. You're no good to our cause when you're dead. Senpai. One of the other Shinigami said to their instructor. The portal is ready now. Right. Hazeyama said. We go first, then you march through, single file. Once we're through, you'll be divided in 4 groups, with one of us each observing you. We won't interfere unless you're in serious danger. This is up to you now. With that, Hazeyama and his colleagues stepped through the gate. Now opening, it looks so elegant, like 2 sliding doors, only they opened to reveal a desolate landscape, plains with little vegetation as far as she could see. One by one, they formed a line and walked through, and Erza felt a rush of air as she stepped through. There was such a contrast. The air was cold, there was a breeze in the air that felt like it caressed her very bones with its chill, and there was almost no ryotsu in the air. After so much time spent in the Soul Society, so much time learning to read and manipulate spiritual power, it was almost shocking to come back here and feel the lack of everything that made up her body, her mind. It was like having her face splashed with ice-cold water. The rest of her class seemed to react no different, uneasy looks all round, some people even looking nauseous. Marissa shivered, wrapping her arms around her chest, and Sensuk grunted, looking uncomfortable. Ramon looked the same, a little bit sour, but she knew him well enough to tell he wasn't enjoying this. Well, this was, she said, trailing off as she took a few deep breaths. It's like being woken up by a slap to the face. Sensuk said, sounding nauseous. I had forgotten what the world of the living was like. Marissa mumbled. We really aren't part of it anymore, are we? You think you have it rough? I've never even been here before. Sensuk whined. I was born in the Soul Society. How the hell do people live here? You feeling bad, Private Shinyu? Hazeyama said, as he walked up to them. His voice was deceptively smooth. Would you like us to send you home, maybe get a nice sleep? See the medic about that nausea? Would you like that, Private? As bad as he may have felt, Sensuk could see a trap coming. Sir, no sir. He barked, straightening himself up. Shinyu Sensuk, ready for duty, sir. Good. Hazeyama said, giving them a glare. And does anyone else feel less than fit for duty? There was a collective sir, no sir. From the class arrivals, Erza included, and Hazeyama nodded approvingly. Good. Cause whoever's too chicken shit to deal with a little first-time travel instability gets 2 months of latrine duty. The class, which had looked mostly miserable, now looked nervously relieved. Form a line, greenhorns. Hazeyama barked. The class obeyed, quickly things considered, forming a long line of 24. Hazeyama began strolling up and down the line, his thumbs tucked into his belt. So, he began, taking a tone Erza recognized as a try-hard take on "You will obey my last command or else, this is the world of the living, the one we all bleed and die to protect. Ante it grand." He looked around spitefully, gesturing towards the empty plains, uninterrupted only by a dead tree or two, a chilly wind still breezing across it. As the class remained silent, he continued. "We got 4 routes to patrol. You do your route, get back to the rendezvous point, and we go back for lunch. Simple as that. We'll divide you in 4 groups, and each group gets 1 squad leader. You will be supervised, but there will be no interference unless you fuck up massively or something goes really wrong. Understood?" "Sir, yes sir." The class bellowed, now feeling a little less uncomfortable, in the face of having a goal laid out for them. Good. Hazeyama began dividing them up, in groups of 6. She saw Rod in one group assigned as leader, unsurprisingly. Before long, her own group had been made herself, Sensuk, Marisa, Ramon, and 2 classmates she knew by name but not personally, 2 boys named Jiamin and Kansu. "You're in charge, Scarlet," Hazeyama said, handing her a red sash. "That means you're responsible for these idiots, so be damn careful with what you do, cause you're holding their life in your hands. Same goes for anybody who leads anyone in an organization like ours." "Got it." Erza swallowed, and accepted the sash. "Yes, sir," she said, and fastened the piece of cloth around her waist. After Hazeyama had pointed the way, and after a quick consultation of a map he'd provided, Erza led the way. It wasn't exactly easy. This steppe had no roads, no discernible paths, and precious few landmarks to follow. A big rock here, a dead tree there, and a light mist covering the area. It was a little scary, not the landscape in itself, not the possibility of hollows, but the idea that whatever happened would be her responsibility. Steeling herself mentally, she reminded herself that she had trained for this, and so had they. This was a test of skill, and if it were easy there would be no point to it. Boldly, showing courage she wasn't sure she had at this moment, she strode forward. She checked the map as often as she could, not wanting to get lost, but as they covered more and more ground, mile after mile without them being lost, she began to feel like this was doable. "I think I sense something," Sensuk mumbled. He'd been quiet, a far cry from his normal, boisterous self. The seriousness of the situation had got to him, it seemed, as much as it had for everyone else. "You sure?" Erza said, trying to sense for spiritual particles. Everything was so different here, so lacking. "I can feel it very slight, but there's a bunch of spirit particle concentrations, maybe 500 feet ahead. And it sure doesn't feel like people." "Hollows?" Marisa asked. "They did say there might be." Hazeyama nodded. "Good call. So, what do you do in the face of a potential threat, when you're out on patrol, all on your own?" Erza began, quickly trying to dig up the right answers from her memory. "We approach with caution, assess the threat, and if the threat level is considered to be within our ability to handle, we engage and purify the hollows." He nodded again. "And if they're above your level?" "Run like hell, sir. And if that's not an option, then we fight and die facing the enemy." "Good lass. Now, what are you waiting for? Go ahead." "Yes, sir," Erza exclaimed. She turned to the others. "Okay, team, we're up against what's likely multiple hollows. Sensuk, any details?" "They didn't feel overwhelmingly strong," he said nervously. And this is a low-threat area, so it should be safe." Erza nodded. "I'm going first. Marisa, cover my back. Ramon, Sensuk, take my left and right side. Jiamin, Kansu, take the flanks. Be ready for an attack. If they come at us, I'll try and distract them, draw them to me, hit them when you can." "Understood." There was a chorus of affirmations, nods and yes and sure, and Erza nodded back, and stepped forward, drawing her sword. The others followed suit, and warily the 6 of them advanced through the mist, their superior following a bit behind. Erza felt heavy with every step, felt a tinge of nervousness and fear, but she swallowed it, pushing it aside. Focusing on the now and here, she sensed forward, sensing for Rishi, and there, finally, she could feel the tinge of spiritual pressure. "Got a number, Sensuk?" she mumbled. "Or Marisa? You're better at this than me." "I count to 7. Sensuk said quietly. "But they don't feel very strong." "Sounds right," Marisa said, her voice tense. "They seem distracted, because they're not reacting to us. That, or they can't sense us. Then let's see if we can take them by surprise," Erza said resolutely. "Quiet everyone." They kept walking, and it felt like an eternity, like the mist would never end, but before too long, she began to see the shapes of hollows further down their path, long, snake-like bodies, weak limbs, floating through the air, burying their beaked faces in what looked like the carcass of another hollow. "They're weak," Erza whispered. "Weak, and small but still vicious. I'm gonna charge in, cut one down when you hear me cry out, the rest of you charge in. Got that?" There was a whispered yes, sir. and Erza advanced by herself, slowly, cautiously, trying to suppress her energy till the last possible moment. The hollows were busy, gorging themselves. She got quite close, 20 or so feet left, before one of them turned its head towards her. It hissed, and the others begun to notice. They weren't too big, just 10 feet's worth of snake-like body each. She could do this. Letting out a loud cry, she charged forward before the first hollow to notice her could react, bringing down her sword. It cut neatly into its mask, cleaving it in two, and the monster began to disintegrate. As one, the hollows moved toward her, snapping at her. Erza continued her charge, dashing forward, cutting wildly. Blood spattered her face, her uniform, as she drew blood, but little else. But the goal was achieved. All 6 of the remaining hollows were focused on her now. She dashed forward, then left, then back where she came from. Any time now. Shine you. She heard Sensuk cry, and he slammed into a hollow from the side, tackling it, sending it spinning, before finishing it off with a heavy stroke of the sword. Ramon didn't cry out, he just jumped in, running his sword through the head of one beast from below. Good. Quickly, Erza turned around to face the remaining ones. Holding her sword in one hand, she grabbed one of the hollows, holding it at bay, while spearing another on her sword, its momentum doing all the work for her. 1, 2, 3 more hollows evaporated. Even so, that left 2 unanswered, 4, not counting the one Erza was holding on to, which was snapping and writhing, struggling to break free. The 2 others were coming right at her, no stopping that. Erza braced herself and Hado number 1, Shao. And one of the hollows went flying, veering off course from a spell Marissa had fired off. She smiled, and continued. Hado number 33, Sakasui. White lightning erupted from her fingertips, and the hollow let out a screech as it disintegrated, completely destroyed by Marissa's magic. That left 2 still, both focused on Erza. She waved her sword at the oncoming hollow, but she hadn't the focus. It slipped under her guard, wrapped itself around her arm, and bit into her shoulder. Erza cried out, letting go of the other hollow to wrestle it off. She was hurting, but not badly, and the hollow was about to learn what a grave mistake it was to antagonize Erza Scarlet. Angrily, she grabbed it by the throat, slamming it down into the ground. The monster hissed, constricting around her arm, but Erza shouted back, and her grip around the monster's neck hardened. Slowly, she began choking it, her fingers pushing through layers of skin and flesh, feeling bone underneath bone that strained under her touch, beginning to crack. The monster thrashed wildly, screeching as best it could with its windpipe being crushed. In its desperate throes, it let go of her arm, trying only to get free. Not wasting a moment, Erza held the hollow firmly, and thrust her sword forward, hard, right into the monster's mask. The thrashing stopped suddenly, as the monster begun to disintegrate. Erza stood up, disregarding the pain in her shoulder. What happened to the last one? She looked up, and saw Jiamin and Kansu standing over a hollow corpse, chopped into bits, their faces a mixture between relief, fear, and exhilaration. The head was still twitching, not quite dead. Well, what are you waiting for? She grunted, holding her shoulder. Finish it off. The 2 of them said, at once, yes, sir. And together, without much finesse, they cut into the mask. The last hollow was purified, ceasing to be. All right, is everyone okay? She asked. No injuries. I got a small nick, but that's all. Sensuk said. I think we're fine, excepting some scrubs and bruises. There were some affirming nods, and Marissa said. I think we should be asking you that. Erza grimaced. She did have a lot of blood on her. It looks a lot worse than it is. She said casually. All this blood isn't even my own. She slid down her uniform a little, to have a look. She did have a wound, but it didn't look too deep. What did I say about playing hero? Hazeyama said, stepping up out of the mist. Good enough work, team. A bit reckless, but passable for greenhorns. He looked at Ramon, who seemed to be bleeding from the shoulder. As for you, Ramon, let me see to that wound. Seeing the reluctant look on his face, he added, that was not a request, soldier. Show it to me. To some annoyance for the man, he insisted on bandaging and treating the wound, citing safety first, but hey, all things considered, they were doing pretty well. 7 hollows killed, everyone was okay, and all they had to do was patrol. This was going okay. There. Hazeyama murmured, putting the final knot in his bandage. That should do it. Are you fit to keep on going? Yes, sir. She said confidently. Then what are you mucking about here for? Get going, you have a route to finish. Erza nodded, and stepped forward again. Everyone, clean your swords and get moving. We got work to do. Yes, sir. They said, looking hardened. They'd been through the fire, endured the heat, and had a baptism of violence. They felt like soldiers now, she could see it as clearly as she felt it herself. As one, they began marching their route, and before long they were headed back to the rendezvous, and not even the ache of her bitten shoulder bothered Erza. This wasn't so bad, was it? After a couple of hours after setting out, the 7 of them were catching sight of the rendezvous point again. Erza could see Rod's group there, Rod giving his usual, sourly defiant look. They looked a little roughed up, but nobody looked hurt. Did you get hollows too? Erza said spiritedly as she came within earshot, walking up to Rod. A whole bunch of 'em. Rod said indifferently. 10 or so. Nothing we couldn't handle. Teamwork was less than exemplary. Rod's supervisor said. Yes, I selfishly killed 7 of them myself instead of giving the others a chance to get themselves seriously hurt or killed. Rod said, rolling his eyes. Your attitude isn't helping. Sounds like you did a great job. Erza said, trying to defuse the situation. But where are the others? Probably lost. Rod said, shrugging. We nearly got lost, 2 wound up being almost half an hour behind schedule, hollow slaying included. I see. Erza murmured. 10 hollows for you, 7 for us, is that normal, Haseyama-senpai? It's much more than expected. Hazeyama said, yawning. But not outside what you could possibly expect. Rod bowed his head lightly. Been a useful trip, sir. Learned a lot here, we did, so now we just wait for the others, and go home. Yes. Hazeyama said, sounding distracted. They're late, though. What are they doing? I'm sure they'll be here any minute. Erza said, suppressing a small impulse of worry. They're being looked after by your men, right? Yes, well, let's just wait here, shall we? They're not that late yet. They waited for 10 minutes or so, and the students chatted away happily, with excitement now that they were used to the climate of the world of the living. Now that they'd completed this first mission, their spirits were considerably higher than before. Erza too felt glad, but somehow a bit concerned, too. Then, out of the mist, they saw the shape of a man walking, stumbling. He wasn't one of the students, she remembered him as one of the supervisors who had gone with them. At first Erza took it to be the patrol returning, drawing a sigh of relief, but she saw nobody else behind him. And then she saw it. His arm, a bloody stump. Blood flowing freely from his face. Oh God, his face, it looked like it had been run through a meat grinder, looking more like a large mess of blood and flesh and bone than a human face. He was barely walking upright, stumbling along the path towards him. She heard Hazeyama draw a sharp breath, hurrying towards him. The man collapsed, and Erza, all the other students too, who had been paralyzed for a second, hurried up. Hazeyama was holding his hand, and up close his wounds seemed even worse. I ran. The man hissed, breathing in sharp, short bursts, blood pouring from his neck with every breath. I ran away, Haseyama-senpai. You keep still. Hazeyama ordered. We'll get you some help. Who did this? I ran away. The man said again, sounding desperate, and there was something haunted in his eyes. You have to run away too. Run. God damn it, somebody go get some bandages. Hazeyama spat, turning to his students. It was too late, though the soldier's eyes were glassy, and he had stopped breathing. Damn. Hazeyama swore, desperately checking for any kind of life sign, a breath, a heartbeat, anything, but all there was blood, trickling down on the ground and slowly coming to a halt. Erza looked around. There were all the signs of panic brewing, students looking frightened, on edge, all sense of accomplishment gone and replaced with fear. Erza put a hand on her sword, to reassure herself. Just one man returning this, didn't he look good? Looks like everyone else kicked the bucket. Rod said, putting words to her thoughts. Gotta say, this looks bad. You sound pretty calm for a situation like this. Erza said, frowning. Actually, I'm scared shitless. Rod said, and there was a slight tremor in his voice, and he took a quick, deep breath. I'm just remembering something Shimura-sensei said, panic on the battlefield, and you're toast. Erza nodded. We don't know that they're all dead yet dash. Whatever did that made a complete mess out of the most senior member of the group. Maybe you're an optimist, but we're better off assuming the worst. Erza made a fist. Some first assignment, she raised her voice, turning to Hazeyama. Haseyama-senpai. What do we do? Hazeyama stood up slowly, the blood of his subordinate all over his shiakusho. He looked odd, so odd, the look of a man processing shock, the first stages of grief. He didn't respond for a bit, his eyes having a glassy look. Haseyama-senpai. She cried again. Shut it. He snapped. Listen up, everyone, we need to open up a way back home right now. Wait, what about the others? Sensuke said. They could be alive dash. I said right now. Hazeyama growled. Oh God. Marissa mumbled, looking around. It's coming. Erza let her senses reach, feeling for Ryotsu. She wasn't the best, but it was unmistakable now, a large mass of it, rapidly approaching. And in the mist over the mist she saw it now, as did everyone else. Paralyzed with fear, they saw it leaping forward. It was absolutely enormous, at least 20 feet tall. Its body looked a little like that of a toad, but with a wide, expanded neck, a little like a cobra. It had a broad, white mask, and absurdly large teeth, drool and blood dribbling down its chin. And claws like scythes on the end of its long, thin arms. And it was coming at them at breakneck speed. Damn it! Hazeyama shouted, quickly drawing his sword. Everyone on me! Katsui, open the portal. Swords out, defend yourself or dash. Erza guessed that the next word would have been you'll die, but the words never left his mouth. The hollow leapt, so damn fast for a creature so big, and crashed into Hazeyama, its clawed hand digging into his torso. Hazeyama grit his teeth, digging his sword into the hand of the monster, but it was for nothing, lifting him, body skewered like a shish kebab. The monster brought him up to eye level, and in a second, snapping like a snake, he bit off Hazeyama's head. Blood sprayed out in spurts, but only briefly before the monster took the rest of his body into its mouth. Not stopping, he leapt again, towards the one remaining senior Shinigami, Katsui, who was desperately trying to open the portal back. The sword was out, the doors were opening, and then the monster's clawed hand struck out, so impossibly long, cutting him clean in half. The class watched on in terror, 12 of them, one monster, and they were all so helpless. The monster looked like it shared the opinion, slowly and deliberately picking up the two pieces of what was Katsui, chewing down first his legs, then picking up his torso. Erza saw with horror that he was not dead yet, a look of helplessness and terror on his face, as he descended into the mouth of the beast, his wheezing cries for help silenced abruptly by the sickening crunch of hollow teeth grinding against each other. Its eyes conveying a perverse pleasure, the beast began to speak, its voice conveying an arrogance, a feeling of absolute power. Good day, my fine fellows. It chuckled darkly and slowly, and Erza could feel a gust of wind, a sickening smell of blood, both fresh and rotting, coming from its mouth. I am Hannibal. I will be your host for today. He gave a mock bow. Polite as I am, I must say, thank you so much for the meal. This is a feast I haven't seen in years. Slowly he began to advance, with the confidence of a lion approaching mice. Erza shot a glance at her classmates. Terror running across their faces, true fear, their conviction breaking. So fresh out of academy, so inexperienced, this was not supposed to have happened, and it showed. Stand fast! She shouted, just as the first of them started to run, slipping into a panicked shunpo. Hold your ground or we'll all be hunted down. Stay together, or you'll all be killed. She grabbed one of her classmates, Jiamin. You're staying right here. Let me go. He cried. You heard her. Rod said, slamming a fist into his gut. That goes for all of you. Stay where you are, or I'll make you wish you were hollow chow, cause what I'll do to you will be 5 times worse. It worked almost. 4 more of their classmates dashed away, the terror of this monster overtaking all sense and reason, but the rest herself, Rod, Ramon, Sensuk, Marisa, Jiamin and Kansu, they stood their ground. What adorable bravado! Hannibal exclaimed, laughing again his slow, deep laugh. I will save you for last, my precious little desserts you have until I pick up these stragglers. Be prepared. His voice was all sarcasm, condescending them, but nevertheless Erza felt grateful for the respite. Hannibal leapt off into the mist, and half a minute later, they could hear a scream in the distance. Well, that's it then. Didn't he think I'd die this fast? Ramon said matter-of-factly. Oh God, Marisa mumbled. Just fuck. Fuck. This is it. Sensuk said desperately. We're all gonna die. Game over, man. Game over. Shut the fuck up. Rod said coldly. If that's what you're all thinking, then sure we're gonna die. But maybe it's just me, but I'm not gonna take it lying down. Erza nodded enthusiastically. We can get out of this. Trust me. I was raised in a place where you never give up, no matter what. Where you rely on each other to get through whatever comes your way, thick or thin. And I'm telling you, together we can make it. Somebody will send help if we're not back on time. Maybe we can't beat it, maybe we can, but we sure as hell can hold out. Trust me. Erza wasn't sure if she believed what she said, not fully, but it was something you had to say at a time like this. Marisa nodded. I trust you. Yeah. We can do this. If we get out of this, will you go out with me? Sensuk said, hissing desperately in what would have to pass for a laugh. He's already making jokes. Rod mumbled. Marisa. Erza said. We know it's strong, but do you have a read on how strong? Huge class. She mumbled. Ryotsu level, in proportion to our own, probably at least 7 times more than we're meant to handle. He was very far evolved too, probably old and experienced. He had some pretty clumsy moves on his forearms. Rod piped in. Very fast, but predictable. I don't think his joints let him move them very smoothly. Erza nodded again, taking it in. We're gonna need teamwork on this. The best there ever was. Rod and I are the fastest, so we'll try and distract him from the front. Once we've got the attention of his arms, the rest of you flank him. Marisa, I want you to fire whatever keto you can from behind. Ramon, Sensuk, tail left flank. Jiamin, Kansu, take right. Hit whatever place you can, a joint, his sides, wherever you can hurt him. They all nodded, a small chorus of yes coming from the small crowd. They were terrified, scared to death and at the brink of despair, but they weren't falling into the abyss just yet. Hear that? Rod said. What? Erza said, listening around. Exactly nothing. There's no more screams. He'll be coming soon. Erza looked through the mist, and everything felt so slow. Every breath felt like a minute, every movement down to moving a finger felt like moving through tar. She felt it out there, a malevolent mass of spiritual energy, hate and strength. Raw power, heading their way. Make ready. She said, swallowing her fear. Assume formation. Rod, by me. She stepped forward, holding her sword out. Rod was right by her side, just a yard or two to her right. She had a quick look. Her team was following her instructions so far. And there it was, walking through the mist, its long, thin-clawed arms being the first to emerge. So slowly, yet so horrifyingly quickly, it walked forward out of the mist. More blood down its chin, more death surrounding it, and here it was before them. Well, my little desserts dash, it began, but Erza wasn't in the mood for monologues. Charge! She roared, dashing headlong into battle. Hopping forward at her fastest shunpo, she put all her strength into a fierce, hard blow. She connected hard with Hannibal's clawed arm. The monster didn't even try to dodge. But, surprisingly, his arm was forced back, into his chest, and the monster took half a step backward to keep balance. She hadn't really heard it, there was just a chip in its thick hide, but that wasn't the idea. Dashing under the monster's claw, Rod jumped up, cutting into the monster's throat, not deep, but blood was drawn, splashing out in a wide arc. And at the same time, from every angle, her team came in, cutting into the monster's sides, its legs, knee joints, moving as fast as could while he was distracted. And Hannibal began to stagger. He stood up tall, taking 1 step back, 2 steps back. He looked almost like he'd overbalance, and though a mask couldn't convey emotion, he looked surprised. And for just a moment, Erza felt so proud they were doing it, fighting together. This was the fairy tale way: never give up, never surrender, and triumph. Don't give him time to recover, she shouted, eagerly cutting at the beast's arm, each sword blow leaving a mark, a nick, even drawing blood through its thick hide. Monsters be damned, she could and would fight to the death if she had to. Of course, it wasn't that easy. Nothing ever is. Hannibal roared, and lashed out quickly at Erza, ignoring the others. She just barely avoided a hard hit. Damn, that thing was fast, but even dodging, she took a glancing blow, and was sent tumbling. She wasted no time, using the momentum of the hit to roll back up on her feet, and got back up just in time to see Rod, zigzagging around the beast's legs, finally dashing upwards for a hit. And with calculated precision, Hannibal's clawed arm came down, its palm slamming into Rod's body. There was a dull thud as he hit the ground, and not a sound was made. He was lying there, still and quiet, some blood trickling from his forehead. Regroup, Erza shouted. Everyone, to me. There would be time to worry about him later. Right now, the rest of them had to survive. Obeying her as quick as they could, the others jumped away, narrowly avoiding some quick, fierce swipes. Damn, Ramon murmured, breathing heavily. We can do it, Erza said confidently, more confidently than she really felt. We managed to drive him back just now. Keep going. Hannibal looked at them, standing tall. There were small cuts on his body, little places where he bled, but they were like paper cuts, small, insignificant. I knew there was a reason I saved you for last, he said gleefully. Same formations, Erza barked. Be ready. Dash. Her next order didn't come out, as Hannibal leapt towards them with immense speed. Trained as they were, the graduates scattered, avoiding the attack. Erza jumped back, then held her sword high, charging forward. And then she saw it. Marissa, on the back foot against the monster, desperately firing off a Aikido. The magic simply glanced against the monster's cheek, and its claws surged forward. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Erza was speeding forward with desperate speed and strength, a fury rising in her chest. Die, 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 die. And then the monster's hands connected, running right through Marissa's chest. Erza saw a shocked expression on her friend's face as she gasped for air, and she could see 4 black spines running out through her back, slick with blood. Then, Hannibal flicked his hand, and Marissa's lifeless body went tumbling on the step, blood spraying as it went. Die, Erza roared, and something burst inside her. Anger so great that she couldn't even take it all in, so great that her thoughts seemed to become nothing but a singular instinct of hatred rose in her, and she charged forward. She slammed her sword's blade into the monster's bloodied arm, swinging it hard like it were a club, going into a frenzy. And then Hannibal's other arm shot out, pinning her to the ground. She felt his filthy claws, sticky with blood, pushing against her body, but through the rage it didn't matter. She struggled, only one arm free, frantically beating and pushing at the hand to break free. She could see Hannibal raise his arm, ready to spear her. And then, from the side came Jiamin and Kinsu, again cutting at its knees, and cutting at the hand pinning her was Ramon. And at the front, frantically cutting at its mask, was Sensuk, moving like he never had before. His life was at stake and he was fighting the best he ever had. Annoyed, Hannibal grunted, and his grip on Erza loosened. Ramon grabbed her, and quickly she pulled herself away, getting on her feet again. She took a couple of deep breaths, readying herself again. Sensuk was still fighting, slipping in and out of Shunpo, dodging one blow after another. Come catch me, you ugly brute, he roared, firing a Vishak Keiho into its face. Come take me. I am Shinyu Sensuk, and I am going to dash. And then Hannibal's mouth shot forward, snapping at him. Sensuk barely avoided having his head bit off, but caught just barely in its teeth was his arm. Slowly, the monster began to bite into it, and there was an audible snap as the arm broke. Sensuk screamed, desperately bashing the hilt of his sword against its mask. Unconcerned, the monster reached up with one arm, grabbed him, and carefully pushed him into his maw. Erza saw his face for the last time, desperate and afraid, and then there was one crunch, two crunch, three crunches as the monster began to chew, and the screams silenced. Erza stood as if paralyzed. Her anger was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Fear. She saw this monster, and she saw doom for her comrades, and for her. Jiamin and Kansu, who had not let up, but ignored completely, got its attention now. He looked down, a malicious glare in his eye, and lashed out against Jiamin. He dodged the first hit, but Hannibal followed him with his eyes, well accustomed as a hunter, and then his claws made a swipe, and suddenly Jiamin was cut in two. Kansu looked in horror, his resolve finally breaking, and he turned and ran. To the end, Erza Scarlet. Ramon shouted, punching her in the shoulder. Come on. Snapped out of her shock, Erza slipped into a shunpo right along with Ramon, charging at the monster with reckless abandon. Here at life's end, at the brink of being dead and alive, there was now the strangest sensation: hate, rage, sorrow, vindictiveness, but also a feeling that there was nothing to lose, that nothing mattered other than her sword and using it properly. They charged, quick as they could, but it was too late for Kansu. With a single leap, Hannibal had closed the distance, skewering the poor boy with his spear-like talons. To the end, then. She shouted, nodding to Ramon. He nodded, and dashed to the right. Hannibal turned around, as if in expectation, and there was so much confidence in his pose, such assurance that he was in charge. And, a small, logical part of Erza's mind said, he isn't wrong. But that little part was drowned out, overrun by purpose, by hatred. Shouting her anger out loud, to the heavens for all to hear, she leapt forward, her blade poised to stab. The monster swept at her, but she saw it coming so slowly, and anticipating it, she grabbed at the arm as soon as it was within reach, pulling herself over it, continuing in under his guard. Going right for his neck, she stabbed her blade in, and in it sunk, the blade going halfway there. Furiously, she tore at it, twisting it as much as she could, just doing whatever damage she could. The monster cried out, its other arm shooting right for her, and there was Ramon, cutting into it, distracting him. Sneering angrily, Hannibal lashed out, his other arm slamming into Ramon, and he fell to the ground. Erza barely registered it, furiously working at the wound, tearing and gouging. Maim. Kill. Hurt. Die. And then, straining under the pressure of her own strength, and the toughness of the monster's hide, it snapped, and Erza fell down to the ground. The monster grunted irritably, slowly reaching up to pull out the half of the blade that remained in its thick, tough neck. I have to say, he began, gently beginning to pull out the blade with a delicate touch that seemed strange for such gargantuan monster, you were good sport. I'll remember you as one of the finest meals I had. Erza tried to think of some words of defiance, some last words of fury in the face of death, but managed only to hiss and spit at it, as she struggled to get up on her feet. And then the world was a little grayer. Have you lost your will to climb? Aizen Saushik observed carefully from a distance, standing a comfortable 500 or so feet away from the battle. He could not see a thing, of course considerable distance aside, the mist was blocking everything. But the thing about being a brilliant Shinigami was that so long as it was a matter of reading spiritual energy, eyes were really more of an accessory than a necessity. Even closing his eyes, he could see the picture perfectly clearly: blood being spilled, bodies on their last breath, every second taking them closer to death. Just one left fighting in one huge hollow of mediocre power. Boredom had taken him here, his usual experiments were getting tedious, as was maintaining his many schemes, so he had followed this patrol, to clear his head, make an exercise out of observation. He had toyed with the idea of letting loose some hollows just to watch what happened, but Providence, it seemed, had already provided more than enough of that. He adjusted his glasses slightly. Erza Scarlet relatively quick-witted, strong, and determinate, and so terribly outmatched. Shame, she might have made an interesting experiment subject at some point. He made a mental note of tracking down that particular hollow. There would be some interesting data to him, undoubtedly. He yawned, half ready to return back home. The outcome was clear, nothing much else to this. The hero was dying, the monster was winning, and he was running late for tea. Then, he felt a small surge in power, building up slowly. A furious little burst, like a small dog with a big bark, standing tall in its shortness, defiant though delusional about its strength. Perhaps there was something to Erza Scarlet, after all? It was surreal. Again, reality was blurred with dust and wind and mountain. She could see the hollow's raised arm ready to come down on her, moving slowly, absurdly slowly, almost still but coming down on her nonetheless. She could see it as clearly as she saw the dust whirling all around her. And looking up at the mountain, so clearly there and so clearly not, she heard it speak to her. Have you lost your will to fight? To live? To hell with you. Erza spat. I have done everything, and if you're a part of me, if you come from in here, she tapped her head with a finger, then you know I'm not giving up. So shut up and let me die, if that's what's coming next. You are yourself as you always were. The mountain said cryptically. And I am you, but a younger you, one that desires to live. What do you want? She shouted, her voice cracking. You want to live? The voice said, for the first time showing some emotion, a hint of concern. You must not die yet. You are not yet ready, but because we wish to live, I shall lend you my power for an instant. It will hurt you. Are you ready? I am ready, all right. Erza said bitterly. Whatever you got to do, do it. And the landscape faded, and all that was left was reality, blood-stained, dying reality, monster and dead bodies, step and mist and a clawed hand coming down. And she felt the power in her, surging through her, burning like fire. Standing up, she burst forward, past the claw that hit her, slashing widely as she hopped into the air, the force of her riot so slashing forward in a red, destructive arc. The force bit into Hannibal, cutting from his wretched hip to his wretched shoulder, blood so red it looked black staining her face, her clothes. Hannibal let out a long, shrieking howl, and staggered back, clutching his side. Blood spilled out copiously, and he was breathing long, heavy breaths. Erza felt the force, the power, like nothing ever before, and her hate gave her the will to use it. Shouting an incomprehensible curse at the monster, she struck again, and again, leaving deep, bleeding cuts. He tried to defend himself, block her blows with his arms, but Erza was relentless, pounding him over and over, each strike drawing blood, cutting deep into its flesh. Finally, Erza hit one hard, long final time, and the monster's arm cracked. Breathing heavily, Erza faced him. The power was draining now, but he was grievously injured. He gave her a look of long, vicious hate, and Erza felt a sinking feeling. The power was draining from her, rapidly. She'd be helpless, but the hollow finally turned away from her, ripping open a portal to the world it had come from. Erza sunk to her knees, exhausted. She sat like that for several minutes, or it could have been hours, or it could have been seconds. Time had lost meaning. Slowly, she looked around her. There was Ramon, his body crushed, drawing a few last, raspy breaths. There was Marissa, her body broken, nearly torn in half. There was Kinsu, dead from the hollow's claws. There was Jiam in both halves of him. And there was what was left of Sensuk, just the stump of an arm. She was sitting in a field of blood, all alone, and it began to sink in. Everyone had died, every single one of them but her. Damn. Erza breathed in sharply, at the sound of that voice. Dry, tired, so haunted, but unmistakable. She turned around, and there was Rod, barely standing. You. She began, breathing fast. She felt a wave of nausea run over her, and struggled to keep herself collected. You dash. They all died, huh? Rod said flatly, just barely hanging on to his sword. I'm so sorry, Scarlet. I dash, Erza said, unsure of how to react, what to say. You did your best. It wasn't bloody good enough, was it? Rod snapped, and a look of helplessness flashed across his face. Slowly, he walked up to her, sitting down on the ground across her. Everyone's gone. And there was nothing we could do. Who'd have figured? He raised his sword, letting it rest against his shoulder. Erza shook her head slowly. "We're still alive," she said weakly. "I'm sorry, Scarlet," he said again, pain running through his voice. "I told you dash. Sorry, 'cause you got to figure this one out by yourself," he said, slowly positioning the tip of his blade against his neck. "Sorry, you'll have to see more of this." There was something unbearably matter-of-factly about his voice, and she could see his wrist tense, ready to push upward, cut into his neck. "No!" she cried. Ignoring all exhaustion, she sprung forward, grabbing the blade in her hand. It cut into her palm, drawing blood, but she held onto it stubbornly. "What are you doing?" Rod asked, sounding confused. "I'm dash." "Don't do it," Erza said, steel in her voice. "Don't you do it, Rod Sentry." "Why not?" he said, sounding defeated, but she could feel his grip slacken. "I'm an arsehole, that's why I didn't make any friends in school. The only people who could stand me they're gone now, and I couldn't even help. I don't deserve more than this." "Yes, you do," Erza said resolutely, holding on to the blade. It hurt, her blood staining it, but she held on, refusing to let go. "From now on, I'll be your friend, and you'll be mine. And we're going to make something out of this. We're going to dash." She let out an almost sob, a tear running down her cheek. "We're going to remember them, Rod. Together. Don't you dare leave that to just me." Rod shook his head, and let go of the sword. "You always were stronger," he mumbled. "No, I'm not," she said, finally letting go of the sword. "We're all weak. That's why we need each other, to lean on. Without others, we're nothing. We'll get through, and we're going to make sure this wasn't for nothing." "You're a wreck," he said plainly. "So are you." The two of them sat in silence for a long time, feeling the pain of their injuries, speaking no words, trying their best to ignore the death they had just witnessed. And eventually, that was how the rescue party found them sitting silent, covered in the blood of their comrades, their eyes all but dead as they stared into the distance. Chapter 8, The Pain of Loss, and New Beginnings. There was a great mass of nothing, the merciful sensation of feeling nothing of all. Then there were dreams, terrible, terrible dreams where she saw familiar faces, young and old, all torn down and destroyed in a sea of blood. Then, at last, Erza Scarlet knew herself again, slowly waking from her sleep. She was still half asleep, and she was waking so slowly it was like being underwater, reaching for the surface all too slowly, except the surface was coming inexorably closer, whether she liked it or not. She had a thought. A very simple thought, but a conscious thought nonetheless. "I feel so tired." Why did she feel so tired? Where was this? Could she just sleep again? No, there came that rush, and the land of dreams faded away, and the memories of her dreams thankfully washed away like a sand castle under a wave, and Erza opened her eyes again. Moving her head slightly, she yawned, and looked around. There was some source of light, nearly blinding her, a window, perhaps. She blinked frantically, until her eyes had adjusted to the light. She saw the white, clean walls of a hospital room. Why was she in a hospital? Defying her tiredness, she made a fist, and prepared to get up on her feet. As she stretched, her muscles sore and stiff, she had to have been asleep for a long time. She felt the pain in her body, and saw the bandages. And, hitting her like a speeding locomotive, the memories came back. Everyone was gone. Erza sat bolt upright, almost welcoming the pain of her not quite healed wounds. She remembered it. She remembered Marisa, she remembered Sensuk, she remembered Rahman. She remembered her close friends, her classmates, and she could not actively think about it. Nothing could make her do that at this moment, but her mind filled with images. A desolate land, covered in blood and body parts, the sounds of despaired cries resonating through the air. Good people: Marisa, who had helped her through school when she would have failed without her; Sensuk, who'd make her laugh, who was such a goof but so loyal; Rahman, who was so sour, down to earth, and so much better of a person than he'd ever admit. They were all dead. 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 A wave of nausea hit her, and her body convulsed. She arched forward, retching, spitting. She couldn't vomit properly, only a little gall came out, tasting bitter in her mouth. She stayed bent forward for a few minutes, letting her body jerk, trying to spew out food that wasn't there. She felt so nauseous, so weak, and sick, but it was better than feeling what she'd felt the moment before, the full weight of her memories. The dizziness, the sickness, it helped. But nothing lasts forever, and eventually her body settled down, and the images in her mind came back. They had never really left. It was not like the vision of a Zanpakuto's realm, but she could see it before her eyes, clear as day, in all its terror. She had watched them die. She had rallied them, given them hope, fought against the odds, promised them they could do this. And they were all dead now. She had failed them completely. And in one mad moment, Erza found herself genuinely wishing she had died there too, that she had joined her friends to the very end, that she hadn't lived on, that she could feel like less of a coward, less of a traitor. But even at the brink of despair, Erza Scarlet had a will harder than steel, forged in the furnaces of fairy tale and tempered by friendship, violence, and determination. Angrily, she pushed that notion aside. She did I want to be dead, she did I want to give up. But she had let them down. A small, reasonable part of her mind insisted that, well, this couldn't be her fault, that sometimes you get overpowered and there's nothing to be done about it. And it wasn't untrue, she recognized that. But it didn't make her feel any better, or any less guilty. A tear trailed down her cheek, and Erza, feeling grief, frustration, anger, hate, and helplessness all at once, banged her fist against the side of the bed. It was metal, hard and well reinforced, and it hurt when she banged her fist into it, over and over, but she didn't care. She barely even felt the pain. It was like her body was elsewhere, like all sensations were surreal. Tears flowed freely down her cheek, and she let out one loud cry after another, like a wounded animal. In that moment, it could barely be said that Erza knew herself, who she was, what she wanted. All that was a raw ball of primal emotion, of feelings too great to handle all at once. She screamed, cried, raged towards the heavens, or rather, the hospital ceiling, until she could cry no more, falling back into her bed from exhaustion, breathing rapidly. Slowly, she began to think again. Her head hurt, her hand even more so. Feeling the hurt, she focused on it, trying not to think of the unthinkable. It didn't quite work. She still saw their faces, ruined and stained with blood, but it was distracting enough that it became bearable. She lay there, not knowing quite for how long, and somehow, through some small miracle, she drifted back into merciful unconsciousness. She had to have, because sometime later, she opened up her eyes again, feeling the aches in her body, the pain in her hand. She didn't remember falling asleep, though. She closed her eyes again, and felt the tears, almost welling up again. "Hello?" It was a soft, gentle voice, speaking quietly to her. Erza considered ignoring it, just rolling over and sleeping forever, but she knew there was a world out there and she was part of it. "Hello? Are you awake?" the voice said gently. Erza opened her eyes, and turned to look. Sitting right next to her bed was a Shinigami. She might have thought it was a boy at first glance, if not for the noticeable chest she had. She had pale hair, bordering on white, and a somber, kind expression on her face. "Who are you?" Erza mumbled. "I am Katetsu Isane," the Shinigami said, keeping the same gentle, quiet tone. "4th seat of the 4th Division, and your doctor." Erza, not having anything in particular to say, remained silent. "It looks like you hurt your hand," Isane said after a short pause. "Would you let me look at it?" Carefully, she reached out, taking Erza's wrist. "I don't care," Erza mumbled, pulling her hand back. "It really did hurt, but so what?" "Please," Isane said, producing a bandage. Not replying, Erza relaxed her arm, letting Isane take it. She examined it carefully, before wrapping the bandage around Erza's hand, slowly and carefully, with the confidence of a craftswoman who had done this 1,000 times before. "It's a mild fracture, but nothing terrible," Isane said reassuringly. "It's not nowhere near as bad as your other injuries when you came in here. Most of your rib cage was broken, your sword arm was broken in 5 places and the muscles had torn, and you had multiple lacerations all over your body. You were bleeding something terrible. There's no need to worry, though you're mostly recovered now." I don't care. Erza said coldly. She really didn't. What business did this woman have, talking about petty things like injuries, when her friends lay dead? That small, reasonable part of her mind reminded her that she meant no ill, that she was a doctor doing her job, but Erza wasn't much in the mood to listen. You will make a full recovery, Isane said, finishing the bandage. Erza gave her a look. Then it struck her in all her grief, she had forgotten not everyone was dead. Rod. He had been alive last she remembered, before everything got blurry. Doctor! Erza exclaimed, once again overwhelmed with emotion. Isane looked at her, and Erza took a moment to collect herself. There, was I the only one? Erza said, bracing herself. The only one? Isane said. You mean from the NC-? Yes, the incident. Erza said, feeling another tinge of nausea. Please, just tell me. Where is he? Aside from yourself, Rodrigo Sentry survived too, with far fewer injuries. He is currently in therapy in the psychiatric ward. Erza let out a heavy breath, and somehow it felt like a stone lifting off her shoulders. She wasn't alone. She had saved him then and there. Something good had come of what she'd done. And then she realized that Rod must feel the same things she felt, that what she had done might not be good at all, and the nausea came again, stronger this time. She put a hand over her mouth, and a tear trailed from her eye down her cheek. Isane put a hand on her shoulder, gently stroking it. They say it's a miracle you survived, she said softly. And I know you feel terrible right now. But this is the worst it will ever be. You may not be able to believe it, but it will get better. What do you know? Erza snapped. What the hell makes you think you can just say that? You're not the first person in the world to lose somebody. Isane stood up. I'll leave you alone for now, but not for too long. She turned, and walked towards the door. And there is one thing you should know, I have kept it off for a while, and I will continue to keep it off for as long as I can, but an incident like this gets people worried. Within a few days, there will be people coming to you asking questions. They might get pushy. Isane frowned, and there was a look of disapproval on her face. I want you to know you are safe here. You have nothing to fear. Investigators can be a bit overly thorough, though I'll make sure to be here when the time comes. Erza blinked. What a bizarre notion. Interrogation. Official reports. Such enormous ideas. The world, carrying on like her friends, had never died at all. What do I do? She said weakly. Well, you keep calm. No, not about that. Erza mumbled dismissively. They're all gone, and she choked up, unable to finish the sentence. It will hurt forever. Isane said quietly. And that means they meant something to you. Remember them, Erza. Honor their memory. That's all you can do for them now. Stumped, weak and wordless, Erza simply nodded. Isane nodded back. I have to go now, she said, opening the door. But I'll be back. I'll send somebody over with a sedative, if you need help sleeping too. Erza might have appreciated the concern, but where she was now, all she could do was lie back, and wait to fall back into sleep once more. Erza later learned that she had been unconscious for 2 weeks, and she would spend 6 more weeks in that hospital too. She was healed fully after 3, but the captain of Division 4, Anohana Retsu, explained to her that healing was about more than just cuts closing, bones mending or illnesses passing. The mind needed to heal too, and to that effect, Erza would spend much time talking with Isane, processing her emotions as best as she could. She was never pressured to talk, but eventually she was able to face it all, that death, that she could not have helped it, that she had lost precious people who would never come back. It was not quite healing, but it helped. Isane was a kind, understanding person, and just talking about it went a long way. She was pressured to talk about the incident by 2nd Division investigators, though, however much Isane protested. She was asked to rebuild the scenario in as much detail as possible, over and over, by suspicious men with stone-faced indifference and no tolerance for inconsistency. In the end, for all the grilling it hurt her, but she forced herself through it. It was declared a freak accident. An act of God, A tragic mishap that should never have happened. It was almost unbelievable. What had happened out there on the plains had been unfair, unimaginably unfair. To think there was no design to it, that this just happened was almost too much to swallow. But as she now knew, the universe did not care what you thought was believable. It did not care who you loved, or how you felt, or how strong or weak you were. An accident had happened. It seemed to be nobody's fault. There really had been no indication that place would be a hub of spiritual energy, no numbers had been tampered with, and she was left to deal with it by herself. The investigation closed, but not the questions that came with it. When she did walk outside, people whispered, pointed. She was the massacre survivor, the blood-baptized student thrust into their world in the cruelest way possible. The Scarlet Massacre, they called it. Words whispered behind her back, never said to her face. Erza hated it. They'd look at her like she was broken, damaged goods, something to be cautious about. And honestly, was she not broken? Such thoughts would come to her every now and then, and each time, she pushed them away. She was Erza Scarlet. She was everything fairy tale should be. She would not crack. At least, that's what she told herself, but at night, alone with her mind in the dark, she had a hard time believing it. "And how are you feeling today?" Isane said. It was 2 in the afternoon, and Erza, who after over 2 months of care had finally been allowed to do some menial chores, was back for another session with Isane. "Okay, I guess," Erza said, shrugging. "No worse than yesterday or the day before that." She took a seat on the couch, in the simple white-walled room where Isane had her office. "Have you had any more nightmares?" Erza flinched. "They come and go. Less frequently, at least." "Any recently?" Seeing Erza's expression, she reassuringly said, "You don't have to. This is all about you. We'll talk about what you want to talk about." "No, it's fine," Erza mumbled. "Mostly, it's just them. The 3 of them. I dreamed about them just last night." "Which one was it this time?" "The one where they just stand around, pale as ghosts, just staring at me. And they don't point fingers, or blame me, but I feel/I it in the dream. They're disappointed. I should be with them, they think I was wrong to survive." "It's common, of course." Isane nodded. "Our psyche, our minds have a way of creating coping strategies. Grief is overwhelming, even when it's just one person. When it's several, sometimes I am surprised you didn't repress any of it. Sometimes I wish I could." Erza leaned forward, crossing her fingers. This was always a little uncomfortable, but she trusted Isane so far. "Feeling guilt in a situation like this is perfectly normal. I know you told me 100 times. Some things can never be emphasized enough. You left friends behind when you died and came here. Did you feel guilty about that?" "No, just sad, I guess," she mumbled, feeling a pang of emotion at the thought of them. "And then you made new friends, forming an attachment. For a personality like yours, with such a fixation on close bonds, protection, and companionship, this had to be especially disastrous. We all define ourselves through other people, but a collectivist individual like yourself even more so than others." "A what now?" "Somebody who's really used to being part of a group. What you're experiencing isn't just grief, it's the trauma of an emotional handicap, of being alone when you've lived your life and afterlife always in the company of others." "So what? I just make new friends. Forget about the others." Erza snapped, feeling anger rising in her chest. That reasonable part of her knew that this was not what Isane meant, that she was just a doctor caring for her patient, doing what she thought was best, but emotion wasn't terribly rational. Isane shook her head. "No, that's not what I wanted to say at all. But I am saying you are the kind of person who needs other people. You are strong, very strong, but what are you, in your own opinion, without your friends?" "What the hell do you even mean?" Erza said irritably. "Do you want me to say I'm nothing without them? That it's just pointless being alone, that she choked up. "'Cause it's true, you know. Without them." She fought not to cry again, she had cried enough already. "Some people thrive on loneliness," Isane said gently. "And you are not one of those people. So what do? I just go out, walk up to somebody and go, 'Hello, want to be my friend?' It doesn't come that easy. No, but don't close yourself to new possibilities. You've been through something horrible, but if you let that close your heart, it will only get worse. Erza was breathing heavily, holding back the tears. How about this? Isane said, putting a hand on Erza's shoulder. You couldn't save them that day. Nobody short of a captain could have saved everyone there. They are gone, but they live in your memory. And the way I see it, you have a choice. You can either let this incident define who you are, become one with your pain and never face reality again, or you could use it. Use it. Erza said despairingly. What the hell does that mean? Your friends died that day. But perhaps you can remember that when you swing your sword the next time. Become stronger, and remember this every time it gets hard. Become stronger, so that it will never happen again, never when you're around. Become stronger, aim for the top. Become a captain. Protect the people who need protecting. Be the best you can be, and use this tragedy. Let it motivate you. Erza looked at her confusedly, a tear at the edge of her eye. You think I could become a captain? Isane smiled. I've reviewed your combat data. You have exceedingly strong spiritual energy, and an explosive increase in combat skills across the board from when you started school. Few people can shoot for the stars in the Goti, but you are one of them. Give it your all, and you can make it. I have faith in you. Erza took a deep breath. You're saying this 'cause you're my doctor, though. It's true, I'm probably biased, but that doesn't mean what I said isn't true. You are exceptional. Use that to help people. I can think of nothing more therapeutic. Erza sighed. Thanks, doctor. She sniffed, wiping the corner of her eye. Isane smiled. Don't mention it. I think we've made great progress here today. That would not be the last of her visits, not for years to come, but Erza was slowly learning to move on. Life found a way to keep going, through pain and horror and weakness, because if it didn't it wouldn't be life anymore, and Erza was very much alive. She did her chores, took her sessions, and one day at a time, life moved on. Without her friends, but with Erza still in it, not clinging to her past any more than necessary. She slept uneasily, though. Her dreams were still haunted by the pale, dead faces of her friends, staring down at her. Sometimes accusing, sometimes pitying her, sometimes, rarely, even smiling. She did not relish sleep, even when she was dead tired, for the night was long and full of terrors. And even in her inner world, in the realm of her Zanpakutu, things had changed. She still couldn't climb that mountain, she still got an inch further every time, but the sky had turned red, the color of a dark pink, and the ground was scarred with cracks. She wondered often whether this was because of what had happened to her, or because she'd been forced to use the power of her blade before it was time. At any rate, climbing was no easier. But climb, she did. A couple weeks later, Erza was once again wrapping up a session with Isane. The doctor had been very helpful to her so far, though the road to healing was slow. I dunno, Isane. Erza muttered, leaning back in her chair. I'm feeling better. Things are fine. You don't sound that convinced, you know. Isane said, smiling lightly. You're doing better, but you're not fine, in my opinion, not yet. Erza groaned. So will I be clear for service any time soon? I mean, I do still have nightmares, but I'm not unfit for duty, you know. Soon. Isane said reassuringly. You've said that a lot of times. If you'd like to make a complaint to Captain Anohana about this, you're free to do so. No, by all means let's not bother her. Erza said, holding up her hands. That captain had a way of terrorizing you with just a smile, and while she wasn't sure why she was so scary, she wasn't keen to try and find out. Still. I'm doing well. What kind of progress is there left that I can make just by sitting around and talking? I've talked about how that makes me feel a million times now. Isane nodded. It's true. Some of your therapy is getting stale in some ways. To be honest, I'm not sure we can just spur the process forward sometimes, change comes slowly. There's nothing I can do, then. Or you. No. Isane said, but Erza noticed something different in her voice. Nothing, really? Not anything. I think maybe we should focus on dash. If you know something, tell me. Erza said sharply. There is one thing that came to mind. But I don't want to say it's best if you let it go. You don't get to say half a sentence. Erza nodded enthusiastically, her tone coaxing. Come on, don't leave me hanging. I don't want to say, Isane said carefully, because what came to mind could do more damage than good. And once I told you, you wouldn't let go. You really should think carefully dash. Think carefully about what? Something I don't know? What is it? Erza sighed. Come on, doctor, please. There is a way, Isane began hesitantly, a way, theoretically, where you can observe the living from afar. There's a newly created device from the 12th Division. It's meant as a spying mechanism, but it doesn't have to be one. And it could show you the living, the people you left behind, and what they do. What life without you is like. You'd be able to see how they are doing and how they've moved on without you. You're dead, you're in the afterlife, and you should move on. It would be a form of self-inflicted emotional torture, the worst form of nostalgia. Do you want that? It could show me my old friends. Erza said, almost breathlessly. Even if they are from another world. It had become clear to her, over time, that her world of the living was not the same as the regular world. A mystery for another time, nothing she knew how to answer. I am told the machine links you to your past, using your memories as a sort of beacon. So yes. In theory. Erza put a hand over her mouth, feeling a little overwhelmed at the thought. To see them all again, to see them, see what they were doing and what had become of them, even though they could not see her back, she wanted it more than anything, she realized, more than anything she could think of. She missed them all, she always had, but the longing struck her harder now than before, at this reminder of her old life. She had to do it. I hear what you're saying. She mumbled weakly. It will hurt a lot, and maybe that's true. But I'm already hurt, and I don't see how that could get much worse. Trust me, it can always get worse. Isane said, patting her back. You should dash. Please. Erza snapped. I have to go there even if I have to beat down every guard in the way, tear up the division, I will dash. Calm down. Isane said, sighing. If you insist, if you're really, really sure, then, maybe. But I want to go on the record and say I am against it. And I'm not letting you go alone either. Erza nodded, taking a few deep breaths. Fine. Anything you want, doctor. I'll do it. Just, let me see them again. Isane sighed again. She was going to regret this. A few days later, the two of them marched into the 12th Division's storage, where the device was apparently being kept. 12th Division wasn't a very merry place, busy people hurrying around, hard at work patrolling, studying, experimenting, writing reports, doing, well, science-y things, Erza guessed. But though the place was dreary, though the people were unwelcoming, Erza couldn't have cared less. She was overcome with excitement, with trepidation, so many things running through her mind: nervousness, joy, dread, anticipation, a great sense of unease, and more than anything, I. She was here to see. She was here to remind herself of where she came from. She was here to see her friends again. Isane led her through winding, white corridors, following a set of written instructions given to them by an apathetic division member attending the reception. They walked the wrong way, several times, and Erza added impatience to the number of sensations running through her busy, nervous mind. But eventually, finally, at last, Isane led her to a very unremarkable-looking door. This has to be it, right? Erza mumbled. Fourth time's a charm. Isane said, smiling. She opened the door, and revealed a room just as unremarkable as the door before it. It was storage, plain and simple boxes collecting dust, shelves full of small objects, glass flasks, and instruments and chemicals. A number of objects of varying sizes were on the floor, covered with sheets. Erza didn't know what they might be, and she didn't care. At the far end of the room, Isane said, looking at the instructions. Looking like a large microscope. That would help if I knew what a microscope looked like, Erza stated. She looked around, slowly walking down the room. It was surprisingly spacious. It was crowded, full of things, but large. She walked, Isane in tow, looking around. What would it be? She made her way to the end of the room, looking around, trying to find it. She grabbed the sheet, pulled over one device, pulled it off. It was nothing she recognized, and it certainly didn't look like it would help her. She grabbed another. Calm down. You're not going to find what you look for when you've no idea what it looks like, Isane said. Well, do you? Erza snapped. Calm down, Isane said, firmly this time. According to the instructions. She looked around deliberately for a little while, then reached for a sheet, pulled over something tall, about as tall as herself. She pulled it off, revealing a white, tall, thing standing on 3 legs. Made of metal, with a tall stem, and on the top was a pole holding a big, round disc of some kind. It was almost like some bizarre kind of street lamp. This is it. It should be. Isane nodded. It fits the description, at least. Why'd they put it all the way back here? Erza wondered, inspecting the machine. It looked pristine new, almost unused. I am told it was unfinished. Apparently they ran out of funding. Too expensive to use at a useful scale. But it works. They said so, yes. How? Erza said, walking around it, looking for some way of making it do something, anything. Isane traced her hand along the stem of the machine, and flicked a switch Erza hadn't noticed. The machine let out a light hum, and a faint light began to glow from the metal disc. You press the on button, Isane said, and if Erza hadn't known any better, she'd have sworn she heard sarcasm in her voice. And then what? You sit under the disc, I think. The process is automatic, they wrote. So, take your seat. Tentatively, Erza sat herself down cross-legged on the machine. The disc hovered over her head, its humming intensifying. Erza said, feeling a little, well, nothing in particular. Normal. Wasn't this machine supposed to do something? What do I do now? Just be patient. I don't know, doctor, maybe this was a bad idea dash. And then suddenly, there was a complete blackout, except everything wasn't black, everything was white. Panicking, she tried looking around, she tried moving her arms only to realize she couldn't feel her arms, feel her body, or even see it. She couldn't feel anything, everything was nothing. The only thing she had was her own mind, knowing that she existed. Fortunately, though, this white limbo was only temporary. After a little while, or maybe a long one, who could tell how time passed, there were ripples in the whiteness. Streaks of green and blue could be seen through it, and slowly she realized whatever she was at this point, her body was still absent, was in the clouds. And, given how rapidly they were passing her, she was in free fall. Panic struck her again. Falling from the skies into the ground was high on the list of things she would rather not do. But the little rational voice in her head, keeping her level even as the ground came ever closer, wondered if you could really hurt yourself if you had no mass. Erza checked again. Nope, no body, just her mind hurtling through space towards the ground. And as she passed the clouds, she realized she knew the shapes she was hurtling towards. She recognized the shape of the continent where Fiore lay, a large peninsula. She could see Fiore itself, as she came closer. She recognized the places where the major cities lay. She hadn't been a geography enthusiast, but right now, she was never happier that she at least had learned the world map. And, she realized, her descent was guided. She was headed right for that one piece of land, that one exact spot where Fairy Tale rested. She was headed home. But it wasn't home anymore, she thought, feeling a pang of emotion. It had been home, but... And then the ground came awful close, much more than what Erza felt comfortable with. She steeled herself, bracing for impact. And then she was on the ground, ground to a perfect halt in no time at all. No pain, nothing broken. She was standing floating, actually right before the guild doors. Could she move around? Hesitantly, Erza willed herself forward. And simple enough, she floated forward through the doors. She might not have had a body with her, but the emotion that hit her was still real. Over 7 years had passed for her, but it looked like nothing had changed. She could see them again. Right before her eyes, she saw them again. There was Natsu and Lucy, sitting by a table, and she was hit by an overwhelming urge to walk up to them, say hello, ask them how they had been. Before she realized it, she was in front of them, hovering next to their table. Natsu, dumb, reliable, lovable Natsu, was chewing on a piece of meat, while Lucy scolded him for his poor table manners but not too harshly. It was just like something Erza might have done. And at the same table sat Gray, shirtless as usual. He said something snide to Natsu somehow, she couldn't tell quite what, and Natsu threw his plate at him. The two of them immediately got into a fist fight, tumbling about on the floor, and Erza got the most nostalgic impulse to give them both a thorough beating. Just like old times. Lucy yelled at them, but the two wildlings didn't listen. They never did respond to much else besides violence, and inwardly, Erza smiled wistfully. They were the same. Life had kept going, even with her dead. And before long, several other guild members had joined in the fight, and everything erupted into chaos. Wonderful, familiar, nostalgic chaos, the kind she had sometimes had to put down almost daily. The chaos of people who loved each other, who knew how to live free of restraint, like true friends who knew that a few punches here and there was nothing to fuss over. And then, suddenly, the fighting ceased. A voice could be heard, loud, rough, and distinctly female, and Natsu and Gray both looked terrified. Erza looked, and saw a tall, busty, dark-haired woman, wearing white coat, white boots, white gloves. The only exception were her black, tight pants. At her side hung a very long, very serious-looking curved sword, not unlike her own Zanpakuto, but much larger. She barked something at Natsu and Gray, and the two, tame as kittens, pretended to never have fought in the first place. Life really moved on, didn't it? The woman looked oddly familiar, but Erza didn't dwell too much on it. She looked around the room. There were so many other people left to see. She could see Kana, she could see Levi, she could even see Laxus, that arrogant man. They were all there. And it hurt to watch. Because this was home, but it wasn't home anymore. She realized why Isane had been so reluctant. This was a special kind of torture, in a way. And yet, she couldn't get enough of it. Then, on the wall, she saw it. A single photograph, untouched by all the violence, hanging on the wall. It was her. She got closer, and saw a bit of small text under it. Erza Scarlet, the greatest female mage fairy tale has ever known. She lived for her friends, and died saving others. She will never be forgotten. It was short, plain, simple, and honest, just like fairy tales should be. And at once, she didn't regret coming back, even with all this. Life had moved on. But she wasn't forgotten at all. She heard another voice, one that sounded oh so familiar. Guildmaster Makarov. It was Gray, Natsu, Lucy, and that new woman, being handed a mission. They were talking, laughing, Natsu no doubt boasting and making dumb comments. Oh, what she wouldn't have given to hear them clearly. The dark-haired woman said something that sounded authoritative, and the four of them began to walk out the door. It was enough, Erza decided. She was thick with emotion, and watching them leave, just like she had done with them so many times, it was about as much as she could take. She did not hate this new woman, but gods be damned, being replaced, however good the reason, that wasn't something she would ever be happy about. She wanted out. How did you get out? Did you just will yourself out? For a moment, she almost panicked, fearing that she would be stuck forever, a disembodied conscience, a shadow of a ghost doomed to forever watch what she couldn't have. But then it all blurred, and she pulled back rapidly, out of the guild house, out of the planet's atmosphere, leaving Fiore behind her rapidly. Back into whiteness. Are you okay? She heard a voice, clear enough, through the blur. She blinked, her eyes readjusting to the light. It was, of course, Isane, worriedly patting Erza's shoulder. Are you okay? She asked again. Erza said, looking up. When and how had she ended up on the floor? She tried to sit up, but found herself too weak, still too overwhelmed. Weakly, she reached out with a hand, fumbling. Isane took it, and gently but firmly pulled her to her feet. She was surprisingly strong, wasn't she? How do you feel? She asked. Doctor. Erza mumbled. Oh God, you were right, I saw everything, I saw everyone and they were doing just fine, and I should be happy for them but too overwhelmed, too emotional, she trailed off, stuttering. Her shoulders shook lightly, as she begun to cry. Isain wrapped her arms around Erza, and pulled her in close. It's all right, she said, almost rocking her a little. It's fine. You're going to be fine. Erza didn't, at that point, feel like she'd ever be fine again, but the closeness, just somebody being there for her, meant a lot. God knows she wouldn't have wanted to be alone right now. It's all gone, she mumbled. Everything's all gone, doctor, I can't see them again SSSSH. Isain said soothingly. Yes. You can. One day, you could travel there again. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but you could. Travel between worlds is possible, we do it all the time. Really? Erza said, wiping her tears off. The damn things wouldn't stop flowing, it was like floodgates breaking. One day, you could. I don't want to promise you anything, but it should be doable. So work hard, and maybe one day. Erza nodded, feeling too weak to do much else. She didn't go to much therapy afterward, it still continued, every other week, but she was feeling better. As much as it had hurt to see her friends having moved on, it was a bit of a wake-up call. This was where she belonged now, and she would make her home here. And on top of that, she remembered everything now, it had all come back. From being a child slave to being picked up by fairy tale, right up to Jalal and her own death, it was all back now. As time passed, Erza was slowly phased back into duty. Aizen Saushik, her old teacher, rose to the position of captain, after no less than 4 captains and 4 lieutenants had died victims of inhuman, heretical experiments by the traitor Urahara Kisuk. In one fell swoop, the Godai had lost 5 captains. It was a shocking event, but not quite so much for Erza. Very little seemed to shock her these days. At around the same time, Captain Anohana deemed her fit for duty again finally, and it was time to apply for a division. At long last, one sunny day, she walked out of the hospital for good, or until she got herself hurt again, intent on heading down to the office of whatever it was called, where she could file the right papers. She knew where that was, at least. Or so she hoped. Her hopes, however, were dashed. 7 years of schooling, and the Godai was still a large and confusing place to her, and before long, she found herself lost in the streets. Luckily, her aimless wandering did not leave her alone for long. From out of barracks, she saw a familiar figure walk. Rod. She hadn't spoken to him at all, not since then, but she'd have to, wouldn't she? She had promised they were friends, and Erza did not take such things lightly. Waving a hand, she called out to him. Rod. Over here. He looked at her, and his face was so different. It wasn't scarred or mutilated, but his eyes were tired, so tired, as if nothing in the world really mattered. He did not seem unhappy to see her, though. A very small and very temporary smile went across his face, and he slowly walked up to her. How are you? She asked. Been better, he said, scratching the back of his head. He had never been one for exaggeration. They just let me out. I thought Captain Anohana would never let me leave. Same thing for me, Erza said. She tried to sound cheerful, but found herself unable. Neither of them had much to be cheery about at the moment. At first I felt she was just being unfair, but in the end, I don't blame her. Had to sit in a room and talk about my sodding feelings. Rod mumbled sourly. I saw a lot of people die. How do they think you feel after that? It helps, though, Erza said quietly. By the way, do you know the way to the place where you can apply for a division? Was just heading over there myself, Rod said, shrugging. I'll show you the way. The two of them began walking, neither eager to speak again. They had to, though, Erza realized. So. She began lamely. What did you say, really? I'm glad I saved you from dying when everyone else already died. It's too bad everyone is dead. Want a hug? She didn't have to think of something to say, though. I know. Rod said. It's all up here, isn't it? He said, pointing to his temple. What is? You know what I'm talking about. He said gravely. You know, I talked to the brain doctors 'cause I had to, but I never told one of them about that last part. The part that got you that scar on your palm. The part where? That part. He shook his head, struggling to get the words out. I don't want to be dead. For a while I did, but here I am. I had a long good think about things, and I'm not glad to be alive per se, but I want to keep going. And I wouldn't be here if you hadn't. He trailed off a bit. Thank you. Don't mention it. Erza mumbled. They kept walking in silence for a bit. I'm joining second. Rod said after a bit. Gonna try for special ops. Didn't you just say you wanted to be alive? He shrugged. I'll think of it as a test. If I live through those kinda missions, then I'm good at my job. If I don't, then I'll be dead. He shrugged again. There's good money in it, too. Erza scoffed. Money's a weak excuse. What are you joinin', then? 11th. Single women along a bunch of undisciplined, macho thugs who think of chivalry as a poncy knob thing and you question if I want to stay alive. Was that a joke? Erza said, smiling. Maybe. He murmured. Be careful, though. I will. She said, flexing her arm and making a fist. And if they try anything, I'll teach them what happens. I think a few broken arms or wrists should get the message through. Rod grunted something inaudible, and the two walked the rest of the way quietly, until they reached the whatever it was called office of applying to things. After a rather tedious process involving an unreasonable amount of signing forms, applications, papers of all kinds, Erza was sent on her not-so-merry way to the 11th Division. There, she had been told, she'd report to a seated officer, show him her papers, and they'd take it from there. It seemed a lot simpler than the application process itself, and Erza found herself feeling a good bit of contempt for bureaucracy. Well, at least she was on her way to the least bureaucratic division in the GODI. After getting lost again twice, she finally made her way there, walking through the gates of Division 11 and into its grounds. The group of anarchic, unreasoned berserkers and thugs that everyone else kept telling her were the worst in the GODI. Part of her looked forward to that in fairy tale. They'd never thought much of authority for the sake of authority, following their guild leader only because they respected him, because he cared about them all and what was best for them. It was optimistic, she realized, but she kind of hoped this would be similar, at least. The grounds themselves weren't, that was for sure. It were the same kind of professional-looking barracks, in the same style of architecture as everywhere else in the GODI. People were keeping busy, at least some she could see were training with wooden swords, some were pounding each other with nothing but their fists, some seeming like genuine close combat exercises, others like actual fist fights. And others still were sitting on the ground, drinking what she assumed was cheap sack. Men everywhere, bearded or without beards, scarred or not scarred, all of them looking tough or trying to. And quite a few of them were staring at her, quite unashamedly. Erza didn't let it bother her, and walked up to one of the groups sitting down, 3 men looking sweaty, probably from exercise. Excuse me, she began, I'm here to report for duty. Are any of you seated officers? She tried sensing for riots so, and well, they had enough of it to not be considered small fry, at least. One of them, a big man with a thick mustache and a water skin in his hand, although it probably wasn't water. I'm an 18th seat, and my friends here are both 20ths. Oh, good. Then dash. Question is, what's a chick doing here, reportin' for duty? He said, getting to his feet. I'm here to join your division. I signed the papers and everything dash, she said, producing the papers from her shiakusho. Papers? The man sneered, slapping them out of her hand. Little girl, this is 11th Division. If you need a paper saying you're a badass what can join us, then you ain't a badass at all. Hey! Erza exclaimed angrily. Hey, what? He said, coming in close. He was a few inches taller than her, and had some pretty noticeable muscles. Yeah, wanna be careful, Konobe. One of his friends said, taking a swig. I know that face, she's the one who survived the Scarlet massacre. The Blood Princess. He laughed. Erza balled her first, and grit her teeth. Say that again. What, Scarlet massacre or Blood Princess? Konobe said, putting his face uncomfortably close to hers. Get the fuck out of here. This is a place for men, not dash. Erza's fist connected squarely with his jaw, lifting his feet off the ground. Before he even hit the ground, Erza had grabbed him by the neck, slamming him into the ground. Angrily, she slammed her fist into his face once, twice, ignoring his struggles to get out of her steely grip. His two friends got up on their feet, advancing on her. She stood up, holding Konobe by the collar. He was bleeding from his mouth and nose, and Erza shot the two of them a dirty look. If you want some, come and get it. She said darkly. But I just knocked the air out of somebody 2 ranks higher than you. You may wanna rethink that. The two of them looked at each other nervously. Their fists were balled, but they looked uncertain good. Well, what'd we got here? She heard a rough voice from behind her, and she turned around, dropping Konobe, who let out a small groan. The man who had addressed her was a mean-looking burly man, with a captain's haori, carrying his sword against his shoulder. Erza Scarlet reporting for duty, sir. She said in a low tone. So fucking formal. He grinned. I'm Kiganjo Kenpake, your captain. And you just beat up a dumb punk who's supposed to be your superior. That's insubordination, ain't it? Well, this wasn't exactly a good start. S right, sir. Konobe groaned, still on the ground. She's fucking crazy, just attacking me out of nowhere. She should be flogged. Sound advice. Kiganjo said, nodding. Then again, you just got pounded into the ground by a weak little girl. What's that say about you, Konobe? You're demoted to 20th seat. Kiganjo said casually. What? Forget about the flogging. We don't do that here. The captain said reassuringly. And don't worry about the whole girl thing, the only question is, can ya fight? Everyone was looking at them now, and Erza felt a little uncomfortable. This wasn't how she pictured it go. Yes, sir. I can fight. Deciding to bare her fangs a little, she added, in fact, I think I could beat almost anyone here if I had to. It was an arrogant thing to say, and Erza didn't quite believe it. There were punks like Konobe, but also many strong, experienced fighters around. But a bit of tough talk might be appropriate. Kiganjo let out a long, hearty laugh. Live through a massacre, and come out kickin' and with an attitude to boot. I like it. You're full of shit, but I like it. He grinned. Welcome to Division 11, girl. Since ya just pounded Konobe, how about you take his rank at seat 18, or should I just give you the captain's coat at once? And no, sir. Thank you, sir. She said, giving him an awkward salute. Well, this was going a bit better. Chapter 9, New Life in the 11th. A month had passed since Erza had joined the 11th Division, and all in all, she was content. It was hard work, drill exercises, patrols and frequent combat simulated and real. They would often patrol dangerous areas, or hunt for hollows, and though it was dangerous work, it suited Erza well. But of course, there was also time to relax, to sit back and drink and rest your muscles. Erza didn't drink much of the sake, but the rest was welcome. The pay was fair, although there didn't seem to be overmuch to spend it on. There would still be some men who'd make a comment here and there, direct or insinuated, about her having ovaries, but being 18th seat already put her above most division members, and her fearsome power let her trounce anybody who crossed any kind of line. After having beaten that first officer, all it took was a few knockouts here and there, one hit KO each time. She was stronger than most still, and the division's members seemed to get the message. She was gaining if not acceptance, then at least some respect. She could settle for that. Yes, her duties were all right. It was a bit stiffer, more professionally minded than it had been in Fairy Tail, where most members did as they pleased so long as they did their part to keep the guild afloat, but she wasn't bullied, and she was mostly treated fairly. The memory of the massacre still haunted her when she was out on patrol, but she had learned to handle it by now, It had become a nasty memory, definitely second to her sense of duty. Her division was home to some disagreeable people, though, as she had experienced just the other day. Out on a patrol, another eventless walk up and down the streets, she had seen 4 men she recognized from her own division in the distance. Taking her time patrol was not a duty that required much effort. She had walked up closer. But then, as she could see it more clearly, it looked like a scuffle. Were they fighting? That did sound like them. But as she got closer still, she saw that it were 2 people down on the ground, shoved around by the 4 division members. She knew them not by name, but recognized them as seated officers, who apparently liked kicking people when they were down. And laughing about it. A sensation rose in her chest, pure anger overflowing her mind, almost faster than she could perceive, and her fists had balled before she had even noticed it. Picking up her pace, she walked up closer. The 2 people on the ground were a boy and a girl, 2 young 4th Division recruits carrying supply bags. "Listen, kids," one officer said, looking and sounding exactly like the type of person Erza knew to be in charge, aware of it, and intent on rubbing it in the face of everyone he could. "Y'all need to learn a thing or two about respect, you see." The men around him laughed, as he put his foot on the back of the girl, grinding her down into the dirt. "Please, sir," the boy pleaded, we just have to deliver these to Division F5, and we'll be on our way." "You think you're tough, talking back to us?" another officer said, chuckling, and kicking the boy on the rear. "And no, sir, but dash. See, this is what I'm talking about," the first officer said, yawning. "These 4th Division punks just got no goddamn respect for nobody." He leaned in over the girl, and sneered, "Ain't that right, little one? Ain't the 2 of ya just pitiful?" I dash the girl stuttered. It would have continued, for God knows how long, but Erza was right there now, standing right behind him. She forced herself to be calm, well, calm as could be. Gently, she tapped the leading officer on the shoulder. Surprised, he turned around. "What?" he said irritably. "Oh, it's you, ain't it? Blood princess, and all that. What you want?" Erza's fist slammed into his jaw, gratuitously and powerfully, and she could feel bone cracking under her knuckles. It felt gratifying, almost as gratifying as watching him sail into the wall across the street, out cold. "Why, you crazy bitch!" one of the officers cried out, eyes wide with shock. You killed him. What the hell gives? I broke his jaw," Erza said, with a furious, frightening calm, the calm of a sea about to erupt into the storm of the century. "You asked what gives? I think you need some explaining." No, another officer rambled, holding up his hands, "We're fine, really. It's all just a misunderstanding. Look, we're all friends here dash." "Really?" Erza said, giving him a flat look of distilled disbelief, the kind that said, "I know you're lying, and you know I know you're lying, and you're only making it worse for yourself." Looks could be quite eloquent. "Yes, really." Another one cried out desperately. "Since you seem to need an explanation," Erza said, ignoring him, "I'll be happy to provide one. If I ever hear of you doing this again, you'll be visiting 4th for a very long time." "Yes, we understand," stuttered one of the officers, "we promise, we will dash." What he would do would forever be a mystery, as Erza surged forward, slamming a fist into his gut. He retched, gasping for air, and doubled over. Erza gave him no respite, and backhanded him hard, and he tumbled into the hard rock of the street, after having spun twice through the air. The 2 remaining officers gave her a fearful look, and turned tail, running. They did not get far. 2 brutal minutes later, 4 unconscious officers lay on the street, all of them with bruises that would last them months. Erza turned to the 2 4th Division members. "I'm sorry to have to ask this of you, but they may require medical attention," she said, making an effort to sound friendly. "Can I rely on you?" "Yes, sure," the girl murmured, getting some bandages out of her bag. "Yeah, count on us." That was. The boy murmured. "Just let me know if they trouble you again," Erza said reassuringly. "I am Erza Scarlet, and I may be 11th Division, but this is something I won't tolerate." "Yes, sure," the boy said, nodding. "Good," Erza said, nodding, and continued on with her patrol. This 11th division was problematic, but by word or by fist, she would try and make it a better place to be. She was doing okay. Isane had been right. Right now, she was swinging a wooden sword, going through a series of thrusts, slashes, parries, attacks, some very basic training to warm her up for the spars to come. Half an hour more of this, and she'd be ready. She already felt a nice, slight burn in her muscles. Deciding that it wasn't quite enough, she upped her pace a little. Almost lost in her training, it took her a while to register the talking. Standing around near her, and the dozen or so members training near her, were two men, talking casually. It was annoying, but the sergeant would have words with them. He wasn't keen on slackers during practice time. Still, she couldn't shut out their talking entirely. "I'm just saying, this ain't all I expected," a rough-sounding voice said. "Join the Godii," they said. "11's for you," they said. "Full of badasses who don't take shit from nobody. And here we are, surrounded by green little twats what barely know how to hold a sword. Your attitude isn't very beautiful," another voice said, sounding much smoother. "Of course we'll stand above the unseated ones. We're stronger and better than that by far. You can't judge these people by the same standard you judge yourself. It simply isn't fair. I guess," the rough voice said. "You'd think they'd at least have the basics down to a science, though look at hitting like beginners all over. They need practice, or a hollowed just tear. A new asshole. Even their officers seem weak. Look at that one over there, with the red hair." Erza almost paused, but kept going. "She's better than the newbies over here, but even she's not doing it right. She hits too hard and fast to avoid a follow-up if she got parried, and I could knock her off her feet if she hit like that in a spar. And her posture's better, but it still needs work. Too easy to unbalance. You need stability dash." "Excuse me," Erza exclaimed, finally stopping. "If you have something to say, why don't you say it to my face instead?" She turned to look at the two men, wiping sweat from her brow. One was bald, with strange markings at his eyes and a mean look in his face. The other looked elegant, handsome even, in a dandy man sort of way. "You seemed busy," said the bald one, and she recognized him as the man with the rough voice. "No offense, it's just that your form could use some work." "Really?" Erza said skeptically. She wasn't one to toot her own horn, but her skills being questioned like this, after all her experience, it was a bit irritating. "Why don't you show me how it's done?" she said, taking a step forward. "Now you're talking," Ikeko said, grinning. "Get me one of them practice swords, and I'm on." Quickly, a wooden sword was produced from one of the training Shinigami, and suddenly, Erza realized, there had formed a bit of a circle around them, people looking with anticipation. The new blood against herself, the blood princess. She still hated that name, and who didn't love a good show? "Well, a sword ain't my weapon of choice, but it'll do," Ikeko said, giving the sword a few training swings. "Are you going to talk or fight?" Erza said, already having taken a stance. Good, I like it," Ikeko said, launching himself forward. Viciously, he struck at her again and again, with ferocious power and speed. Erza was keeping up, just barely, blocking, but she was at the back foot, her mind 100% focused on just keeping her guard up. "Right down to business. That's the attitude you need," Ikeko cried, slamming down on her one more time. Erza held the strike, getting pushed back, almost down to one knee, but she held it. "Not bad," Ikeko said, grinning as he pushed her back, slowly. His body was well-tuned, muscular, and he was brimming with spiritual energy. "More talking," Erza grunted, pushing back hard, breaking the stalemate and hopping back a step. Ikeko immediately lunged forward, slashing down from above, cutting at her once, twice, 3 times, and Erza barely kept up. Then, he struck down hard. Erza's sword went down, and in an instant he'd slammed the hilt of his wooden sword into her forehead. Before she knew it, the dull edge of the sword was at her neck. "And now you're dead," Ikeko said casually. "Not bad, though. For a greenhorn." "Again," Erza said resolutely. "I'm liking you better already, greenhorn," Ikeko said, with a vicious sort of cheer. Not waiting another second, Erza charged forward, striking as fast as she could. She hit once, twice, then stabbed forward, against his head. Ikeko casually parried the first two, dodged the third, and counterattacked. Erza moved her body to the side, Ikeko's sword just barely grazing her chest. Quickly, not letting him take the initiative, Erza lunged forward, slamming down. Ikeko just caught her blade, directed the force downwards, overbalancing her. Erza went into a roll, she wouldn't be knocked over like this. And then, with one quick swoop, Ikeko's blade was at her neck, when she was halfway through getting to her feet. Dead. He said matter-of-factly. More. More. Erza said, getting to her feet. This was obnoxious. Who was he to just walk all over her? Turning to face him, she held her sword up, examining him carefully. He moved with confidence, and had the bearing of an experienced sword fighter, fast and strong. Just defending hadn't worked, and neither had attacking. Quick like a cat, Ikeko moved forward, swiping at her from the side. Parrying, she caught the blade's edge on her own, and dodging down she let it slide over her, and for just a moment the momentum carried through, making him overextend. Quickly, she lunged forward, aiming for his neck. She'd get him this time, she was sure of it. And at the last damn moment, he bent himself back into the side, the edge of her sword just scraping against his neck. Unbalanced, Ikeko lashed out against her, and Erza was forced to block. Quickly, he recovered. He grinned again, before attacking again. Erza blocked, dodged, but he was faster and stronger. She barely got any attacks in. Still, she was dragging it out, not leaving her guard down for a long time until finally, he found an opening, slapping the sword out of her hands with a quick strike at her arm. Dead. He said, pointing the sword at her chest. You got the right spirit, though. Erza grumbled, not sure what to say to that. You overextend a lot. He said, dropping his wooden sword. Not by a lot, but it's like you're not that used to sword combat against another Shinigami. Ain't that big a deal for a hollow hunter, I guess, but it's something to consider. Also, try not to lean so much on your right leg when you step forward. A good fighter can read your pose and adjust to it, and that makes countering really easy. There's balance, too. You hit hard and fast, but you ain't found the right balance. Somebody could read that too. And dash. All right, Yumi Chika said. Leave the girl alone. I think you humiliated her enough already. It's fine. Erza said, wiping her brow. It was good practice. Another one. Ikeko said. No, not another one. Yumi Chika said strictly. We got work to do, remember? Damn patrols. Ikeko murmured. All right, woman, if you ever feel like round 4, come find me. It's Erza. Erza said. Erza Scarlet. He nodded. Madare Mikeku. Yumi Chika sighed. You really don't hold anything back, do you? Never do. He said, shrugging. You know, you're the first one so far not to talk about me being a woman. Erza said. I noticed you had tits and all, but I was more interested in your sword. Don't know about the idiots here, but I'm here to fight, not chase skirts. That's about all there is to it. Good. Erza said, smiling. Ikeku, now. Yumi Chika said impatiently. All right. Ikeku grumbled. See ya later, rookie. He gave her a wave, and turned around to leave, walking away to whatever duties that awaited him. Erza watched him leave, feeling both a little peeved and uplifted at the same time. Being beaten down wasn't fun, but Ikeku seemed a decent sort. Once again, she started her sword exercises, swinging up and down. She, too, had duties. In the following weeks, the two of them would spar often, with swords, without swords, butting heads as often as they could. Ikeku was a rough, vicious kind of fighter, his experience earned from years and years of brute fighting in the Rukon. He had little in the way of form in a particular style of sword fighting, favoring his own style, smooth and adapted for speed and using whatever openings there were. She would lose most of the time, but every so often, she'd win a round, and slowly she adapted. It was quite a step up from academy training, and Ikeka was a strong partner to learn from. She won rarely, but the training demanded much from her, spurring her to improve. Slowly, she grew stronger. Today, however, they were not sparring. For the first time since that time/I, Erza was out on a mission, a real mission, far out in the Rokanga, hunting for a small pack of hollows that had terrorized a settlement of pluses for near 3 days. Ikeka was leading the expedition, sitting at a title of 13th seat, although Erza suspected he was easily on par with a 5th, or better. With them were Yumi Chika, and 3 more Shinigami, all of them seated officers, although ranked low. A sense of nervousness and anticipation was building in Erza's gut, a mixture of fear, resolve and a bit of zeal building up. Taking deep breaths, she was fighting back that feeling, forcing herself calm. She remembered them all still, every last frightened cry, every last horrified face. And this was the kind of work she would do for a living, so she damn well couldn't let herself be consumed by it. "You all right?" Ikeka asked, looking over his shoulder. "I'm fine," Erza said in what she hoped was a neutral tone. "All right." He stopped, and turned around. "Listen up, you lot. We're looking at least 3, probably more. They got a dozen souls already, and we're putting an end to it. We do this together, and carefully. If anybody tries to be a hero, I'll kill you myself. Understood?" There was a chorus of "Yes, sir," from the assembled party, aside from Yumi Chika, who just yawned. "Let's get started, then," he said. "This is ugly work, and I want to be back at the division by tomorrow, at least." "Yeah," Ikeka said, nodding. "They shouldn't be far now. I'm talking point. Yumi Chika, you're covering my right. Scarlet, cover my right. Idme, Jujin, Shendo, follow our lead. Let's go." They walked forward, and to an observer their pace might have looked leisurely, but to Erza there was no mistaking the tenseness of the soldiers here, the readiness to draw blade at the slightest hint of danger. Ikeka seemed relaxed, but every step was purposeful, and he scanned his surroundings continuously, looking for any odd movements. Erza herself tried to sense ahead of her. It was a talent not that common in 11th, she had noticed they seemed to focus all Ryotsu control into being a better brute fighter, if they used any control at all. It was an effective enough, but very limited approach. She liked better knowing what was coming. She sensed nothing just yet, though. For 5 unbearable minutes, they continued forward, feeling nothing, hearing nothing other than a bird chirping here and there, and the trees around them making a rustle as it moved in the wind. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she felt it not far ahead, one large source of malevolent energy, almost drowning out 1, 2, 3, 4 more. All seemed calm at the moment, but she couldn't tell much more. Up ahead, northeast. She mumbled quietly. 100 meters or so. "You sure?" Ikeka said, looking in that direction. Erza nodded. "How many?" "At least 5. "All right," he murmured. "Swords out. We move through the forest quietly. If we can, we take them by surprise." They all did draw their swords, slowly and carefully, and moved through the trees crouched low, everyone's eyes tensely fixed on the target ahead of them. Slowly, gruelingly so, Erza began to get a view of their targets. It was hard to make out clearly through the vegetation, bushes, and trees blocking her view, but slowly she could make the figures out. One large, gangly hollow with absurdly long limbs and bloodied claws, feasting on something she couldn't quite see what. She had her suspicions, of course, and when the beast raised his head up to gobble a piece down, she saw a leg go down its throat. She felt nausea rising in her gut, and she fought it back, feeling the taste of bile at the back of her mouth. People, always people, defenseless people hunted like cattle. Around the huge hollow were 4 smaller ones, dancing around the big one, looking for overlooked morsels, cackling and bouncing around. The ground around them was covered in blood, and severed limbs and freshly eaten clean bones lay around. The nausea started to subside, and Erza felt something else in her chest, growing bigger, like she was about to burst. "All right," Ikeka whispered, when they were just 15 or so meters away, hidden behind a thick bush. "On my go. Cover each other's asses, and go for the masks. Don't get distracted." There were a few quiet affirmations, a yes sir here and a grunt or two there, but Erza remained quiet, grasping the hilt of her blade hard enough to whiten her knuckles. For a small eternity, they stood crouched there in silence, watching the monsters feast on the dead. There were so many bodies, they'd have had to have herded them together before they were killed, like sheep to the slaughter. And then Ikeko sprinted forward, shouting loudly, spiritedly, his Shikai activating as he leapt into the air. "Grow, Hojikameru!" he shouted. The blade changed, turning into some sort of spear, and he slammed into the huge hollow, the blade of his weapon cutting deep into one of the forelegs of his target, nearly cutting it clean off. The monster roared with pain, and immediately, the four lesser hollows began to move at Ikeko. But the rest of them were not far behind, and with precision and grace, Yumichiko leapt forward and cut into one of the hollow's masks from behind. It shattered, and the beast began to dissolve. Ikeko was locked in combat with the huge hollow, driving it back with furious strikes, but Erza wasn't even aware of it at that point. The feeling inside her had bubbled up, burst over, overrunning her like a river bursting out of a broken floodgate. It was rage, pure rage, red-hot and guided with a purpose. Holding her sword firmly, her muscles remembering every ounce of training she ever had, she charged the closest hollow. A creature of instinct, it shrieked, turning to face her, but before it had even halfway faced her, Erza's sword had gone into its side, almost to the hilt. Gritting her teeth, almost growling, she lifted it into the air, the blade twisting and maiming inside the monster's body. It shrieked and cried, flailing wildly, but it only made it worse. Viciously, Erza brought her sword down, wrenching it from the monster's gut. Innards, blood, and gall spilled on the ground, and the monster jerked desperately. Even in its death throes, it crawled toward her, reaching out with a claw to cut at her. A cold expression on her face, she slammed her foot down on its paw, crushing it completely. The monster shrieked, but its cries were weaker now. Blood on her face, Erza raised her blade, and brought it down hard, shattering its mask. It dissolved, and it felt to Erza like it deserved worse. Quickly, she looked forward. Yumichiko was dodging the attacks of a nimble hollow, two of her partners were locked in combat, and that left one, leaping at the back of her teammates. Well, not if she could help it. Slipping into a clumsy shunpo, she tackled it from the side, knocking it over midair. The beast slammed into the ground, bouncing, almost instantly getting back to its feet. But Erza wasn't letting it, wouldn't give it the chance. Just as it was almost on its feet, Erza's leg slammed into its side. The monster was perhaps 4 times her size, but it didn't matter. It went flying, knocked onto its back, and instantly she was on it. It clawed at her, no stranger to fighting at its back, but it was too slow, too weak. A quick, hard cut nearly split its left foreleg in half vertically, and it screamed with pain. Erza took a step back, letting it get back to its feet. One of its legs were useless now, fresh blood spraying over the forest floor. Screeching at her, it struck at her with its good leg, long, gory claws coming at her head. It was so ludicrously slow to her. She felt like she could run circles around it, like she had all the time in the world. It took, of course, less than a second, but even so, it was the simplest thing in the world to reach out with her sword, cutting its fingers off before the strike had even gone halfway through. The monster shrieked again, reeling back. It reached out into the air, trying to open a gateway back to where it had come from, but Erza was not about to let it. She grabbed it by the tail, and pulled hard. The monster struggled, but fell flat on its face. On its wounded arms, it struggled to get up, only to face Erza with her sword ready as it stood up. For a moment, it looked like it was about to try and fight, but before it could, Erza had cut it across the chest, deep and hard. It reeled, and Erza did not relent. She cut the 1 time, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5, 6, 7, she lost count, as she got bathed in its blood. Before she knew it, before she even noticed it, the monster lay at her feet, cut to pieces, its neck and head at her feet. Forcing herself to calm, she began to breathe deep, long breaths. She was covered in blood, she noticed, and it was like she had viewed the world in a red haze. She took a closer look at what she'd done. The monster she had hit was cut in 5 pieces, but seemed still alive, its head still wiggling, pathetically trying to escape. Well, finish it. It was Ikeku, and Erza turned to look at him abruptly, almost feeling shocked. Oh yes. She was out on a mission. With other people. Oh. Yes. She mumbled, thrusting her sword down hard, piercing the monster's mask. It cracked, slowly, and soon its bloodied body began to dissolve. Erza took another deep breath, and began to slowly wipe her Zanpakuta clean. 2 kills. Ikeku nodded. Good work, Scarlet. He looked around, at the glade and back to Erza. Pretty messy, though. That was real brutal, and not that efficient. You look like shit. Sorry, senpai. She mumbled. Well, everyone's alive and mostly unhurt. I reckon all of that blood on you's from the hollows, eh? She nodded. Well, let's head back. Good work, you lot. Turning around, they all began walking back towards the Godi I-13, towards home. Erza felt weird, now that her rage was beginning to leave her, like her guts had been turned upside down, like her bones were made of jelly. And that's why I say we're being led by a slob. 2 days later, back at the courtyard of 11th Division, exercises had been interrupted. Not everyone was happy with their current captain, and, Erza had been told, it was anybody's right to challenge him for leadership. Right now, it was the 4th seat Koji Kijisen, Erza thought she remembered his name was. He'd strolled in, called everyone to listen, and given them a long speech about the failings of their captain. How he didn't take leadership seriously enough, how all he could do was fight, how there was a difference between conquering and ruling. Erza had found it to get long-winded after a little while. Of course, it was about to end quite soon. She could feel it, as could some of the senior officers, who were looking toward the division's barracks door just like her. A big clump of riot saw, teeming indignantly, the signature of their captain, Kigenjo Kenpeki. The doors opened, and out he came, in all his bulk, marching out with a stern look on his face. What's going on here? He demanded angrily. Why are you lot not on your posts? The division members looked at him with a mixture of gleeful eagerness and anxiety, and then back to Kojiki. Life could get a bit dull when all you did most of the time was practice, and a bit of drama was a welcome change of pace. You! Kojiki cried. You're done here, Kigenjo. You're not worth the title Kenpeki, and you're not worth the title captain, either. Fuck's sake. Kigenjo growled. You got something to say? Say it. The crowd looked at Kojiki, and all that it would have taken to remind Erza of a schoolgirl drama was a collective "Oh. You slack off." Kojiki sneered. You sleep in, you let your seats do all your paperwork, you don't attend meetings, and you don't even manage how your men train. How can you call that leadership? Good fucking grief. Kigenjo growled. You think you could do a better job? You think leading's easy work? I could, yeah. Kojiki said defiantly. Then come and take it. Kigenjo roared. Come and take it all, if you got the stomach for it. Them's the rules, and that's a rule I'll respect. All right. Kojiki sneered, and pulled out his sword. He looked tense, Erza thought, maybe a little afraid, but his resolve didn't waver. Kigenjo, though, didn't draw his. So. He said. You come in, or what? Draw your sword. Kojiki said. Don't need it. Kojiki paused, looking indecisive. Then, readying himself, he cried. Your funeral. He charged forward, sword raised, making to stab at Kigenjo, who towered over him, at least a head taller. And then, in an instant, Kigenjo had reached out lightning fast, grabbing Kojiki by the wrist, pulling his sword out of position and slamming an elbow in his face. Kojiki staggered back, barely holding on to his sword in the one hand. Ruthlessly, Kigenjo kicked him in the chest, knocking the rebellious 4th seed to the ground. Not wasting a moment, Kigenjo got on top of him, holding his sword arm firm with one hand, and slamming a fist into Kojiki's face with the other. He gave him a mean look, and waited, seeing if he wanted more. Kojiki lay still though, seeming like he'd had enough. Kigenjo got up to his feet, and brushed himself off. Finish it. Kojiki hissed, still on the ground. Them's the rules, ain't it? The loser gets it. Erza, and the whole division, watched with bated breath. It was true, the loser of a match for leadership had his life in the hands of the winner, and trying to usurp your captain could certainly be considered treason. You're demoted to 12th seat. Keegan Joe growled. And there you stay till you learn some goddamn respect. He flexed his arm muscles a little, and relaxed. And some far-out rook on hollow hunts would do you good too, I reckon. It was a hard punishment, but not unfair, Erza thought. Well, what are you all looking at? Keegan Joe growled, staring at the crowd. Get your asses back to work, or I'll personally redecorate your collective faces, is that clear? There was a loud, uncoordinated chorus of sir, yes sir, and quickly, the crowd dispersed, each man going back to his duties. The fun, it seemed, was over. A little later, that same day, after Erza had finished the drills and eaten lunch, she was walking towards the division gates. A bit of patrolling in the Godii was tedious, but not so straining, and it's what she had to do next on her daily schedule. As she headed to the gate, though, she was stopped by a tall man with a mustache. It was, she noticed after a bit of mental digging, the vice-captain of Division 1, Sasakaib Chujiro. Excuse me, he said, politely. Where can I find Captain Keeganjo? He'll be in his chambers. I am in a bit of a hurry. Sasakaib said. Would you kindly give him this? He held out a letter of sorts. Sure. Erza said quizzically. What is it? Some sort of message. A summons. Captain General Yamamoto is calling for a captain's meeting. Attendance is mandatory. Please hand this to him at once. Can do. Erza mumbled. Very good. Well, good day for now. Giving a courteous bow, he turned around, walking away. Well, she was in no particular hurry to patrol an already secure area. Erza headed back, to the captain's chambers, where he'd usually be at this time of day. Carefully, she knocked on the door. After a little while, there was a grunt that could be interpreted as come in. Erza opened the door. What is it? Keegan Joe grumbled, sitting beside his bed. A summons, sir. She said, walking in, handing him the letter. He glared at her a while, before taking it. He said it was urgent, sir. She added. Urgent, my rear. Keegan Joe grumbled. All right, fuck I'm going. Get out of here, do whatever you're supposed to do. Yes, sir. Erza noticed a bottle of sake at his nightstand. It seemed like he'd mixed his nap with a bit of booze again. 3 hours later, when she came back from patrol, she took the route past his chambers. She almost felt ashamed to do so, to question him like so even in her head, but her doubts were validated. Door half open, her captain was lying on his bed, snoring like a sawmill, the half-finished bottle of sake knocked over and spilling on the floor. She sighed. Out on the battlefield, he was remarkable, truly one of a kind, a leader who feared nothing, slayed hollows of the greatest kind and led his men to glory. Here, though, in the administrative environment of the Godii, he appeared sometimes a bit foolish, and it was no wonder, really, that people like Kojiki thought the way he thought. Time passed by, Erza trained, she sparred with Ikeku, she talked to Yumichika, she'd eat dinner with Isane every now and then, and life moved on. She was closing on half a year in Division 11 now, and she was making progress already. She had earned the rank of 14th seat. Most commonly, for achievers like her, hollow hunts were the place to be. They were dangerous, required not only strength and intuition but teamwork, and only the top were selected for them. Now, on her 7th extermination mission, Erza was joined by Ikeku and a number of single-digit seats alongside him. Huge hollows, she had been told, huge hollows roaming out here in the world of the living. Where, she didn't know, but it was a jungle not far from a city. They'd already reddened their blades, having purified 4 of the beasts already. Now, all that remained were 1 or 2 stragglers, most had escaped to the wretched world of Hueco Mundo. I don't like this. Ikeku muttered. We got them on the run. Erza said, looking around cautiously as she advanced with the rest of her comrades. Is that a bad thing? Too easy. Ikeku said, shaking his head. The bigger they get, the more arrogant they are, and they don't run unless they know they're outmatched. That was a large pack, and they just ran. Too quick. Something's up. If it's a trap, let's go ahead and spring it. Erza said spiritedly, shooting him a smile. You're crazy, Scarlet. Ikeko said. Then, he grinned. I like it. Hollow. Somebody cried further up. Huge class, running to our north. Immediately, Erza and the rest of her squad slipped into a shunpo, chasing the beast. It was/I. Strange, she had to admit it was running from them, but the safest way to run would be to open a portal and get out. So what was it waiting for? Jumping from tree to tree, she followed behind the squad leader. It was strangely thrilling, this sort of chase. It reminded her of the fights of old, of fighting not for the sake of fighting, but still enjoying your ability to raise hell. Ironically, that was when hell broke loose. Hollow. Hollow. A Shinigami cried, and Erza looked where he'd pointed. In the sky, a tear had opened, and from out of it, 2 hands came, 2 enormous hands. And behind it, an enormous, masked face. She felt a sinking feeling, as she and the squad stopped their advance. It took her a moment to place it, but she recognized the face. She had only seen it in textbooks, like a scary story told to young, ignorant students, but there it was. Minos Grande. Ikeko said flatly. Well, we're in deep shit now. He didn't sound excited, or afraid, his voice was drained of emotion. That in itself was unsettling. The beast tore the portal open fully, and heaved itself into the world. It towered over them, like a titan of old, a giant to swallow them all whole. It raised its head, a red light forming at its mouth. Zero. The squad leader cried. Zero, damn it. Everyone, move out of the way. Scatter, now/I. The red light filled up until it burst, sending out a bright red beam of energy. Erza jumped, flashing out of the way, but the shock of the blast caught her, sending her tumbling. Quickly she got on her feet again, jumping to a tree top. The monster was peering down at them, and on the ground, she could see 2 charred bodies, burned black. This was the power of Minos Grande, the kind of force that made her seem like a joke. And seeing the 2 dead on the ground, Erza looked around, panicked. The rest of her squad was alive, all facing the monster, but for how long? Images flashed in her head, of Sensuk, of Marisa, of Ramon, of all the people she'd lost. Please God, not again, please /I, and she was breathing rapidly, fear crawling up her spine. You ready to do this? Ikeko said, with an almost indifferent sort of calm. Something about him snapped her out of it, brought her back to the here and now. She was still scared, still feeling what she'd felt months ago at the massacre, but she wasn't in charge this time, and Ikeko knew what he was doing, or at least was good at pretending he did. Erza, not able to manage a reply, nodded. Good. 'Cause we may well die here, but we're together, no matter what. Nobody turns tail, nobody left behind. You got that? You're not alone. Yes. She mumbled. Formation. The squad leader cried. You 2, circle round, cut at its legs. And you 2, moderate, Scarlet, with me. Swallowing down her fears, Erza made ready. Time to charge at death's jaws, time to go out there and die like a man, well, a woman, because, well. Fuck it. It was what it was, life was unfair, but you had to play the hand you were dealt. Taking a deep breath, she held up her sword, waiting only for the squad leader's cue. But then, to all their relief, the Minos turned its head away from them, looking in another direction. She expected the squad leader to order the charge, but he too was looking away, and then she felt it too. The enormous, irate riot so familiar to her now. Kigenjo Kenpeke, the wonderful brute, was standing in the air above, a Senkaimon closing behind him. Almost on face level with the Minos, he appeared to be grinning. I thought a hunt would be some good sport, looks like I was just in time. He said, drawing his sword. You lot, stay back. Not needing to be asked twice, the squad retreated to a safer distance, watching the battle unfold. The Minos, so grand yet so slow, reached a hand out to crush Kigenjo. Kigenjo just let it come, and at the last second, cut down hard on it, 2 fingers severing immediately. Viciously, he dashed forward up the monster's arm, pausing only to cut it off at the root. It shrieked, letting out a long, deep roar, one that nearly deafened Erza. Keegan-Joe didn't seem to mind, furiously hacking at the monster, cutting off piece by piece with his blade. Finally, seeming to have had enough sport, he spurred upward, burying his blade in its mask. The monster roared a final time, and the mask cracked. Feeling a surge of relief, Erza watched it dissipate. Her fears had not been made whole, they were alive. Well, most of them. Good job. Ikeku murmured. I thought we were dead for sure. Don't tell Yumi Chika I said that, though. Spar when we get back. She said. You got it. Well, what are you lot waiting for? Keegan-Joe roared heartily. Hunt's over, back to the division, you lazy bastards. She'd never been so happy about verbal abuse. A week or so later, Erza was once again back at the division, sparring hand to hand with Ikeku. He was a dirty, quick fighter, but she was figuring him out, little by little. See, feign here, then I grab you by the ear, and yank your head down. Ikeku explained. It ain't got a fancy name, but it works real well if they don't see it coming. Where did you learn to fight like this? Erza asked, sounding skeptical. Streets. Ikeku said, shrugging. You take any edge you can when you got nothing to lose. I see. And dash. There was a fuss at the gates, people gathering, and the two of them turned to look. A tall man had walked in, rugged-looking and scarred, with long, messy black hair and a giant sword slung over his shoulder, and what looked like a small girl riding his back. Ikeku's face lit up. You know him? Erza asked. The boss is back. I fucking knew it. He said, sounding cheerful. The rugged man walked closer, people gathering around as he walked. I'm Zaraki Kenpeke, he said, loud and clear, and I'm here to toss out whoever's in charge here. Chapter 10, Loss, Reunion, and Power Unleashed. The sun was shining bright and hot on the courtyard of the 11th Division, and it was brimming with people, filled completely save for what was effectively a large arena in the middle, its borders drawn by the division members themselves. Erza was lucky enough to stand almost at the front, and she saw it all, her captain, standing tall and strong, facing this new stranger, a man who had the audacity to claim his title as his own name. He was very tall, and he looked tough, all right, lots of muscle, in a lean sort of way, and scars on his face and chest, wild hair hanging from his shoulders. He radiated power, too, she could sense maybe even as much as her captain. What is this? Erza mumbled to Ikeku, who had bullied his way to the front, standing just in front of her. Do you know him? He's the reason I joined here. Ikeku said excitably. Back when I walked the Rukon, I thought I was real tough till he put me down. I learned a lot that day he didn't kill me, 'cause he doesn't care about killing, just fighting. I always knew he'd come here one day. Why's he challenging the captain? He can't just win and take the title, right? He can, actually. Ikeku said, nodding. He seemed spirited, so different from his usual laid-back, tough guy outlook. It's an old rule, and most divisions don't use it, but one of the ways to become captain is to challenge the captain to a fight to the death. You win, you take the title. That's horrible. Erza exclaimed. It was a revolting idea. Leadership wasn't about strength of arm, never had been. It's a rule from an older time. But he has to follow it, there's no choice. But, he'll win, right? Ikeku shook his head. No way. Sorry about the captain, but this is the end of the line for him. Erza opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, wanting very badly to voice some articulate, infuriated protest against this, but nothing sufficient came to mind. She wanted to shout at Ikeku with rage, at the entire division and the law. But not a sound passed her lips, and gaping like a fish, she stood there, just watching. It didn't take her that long to recover, but it left her angry, and she balled her fists, grit her teeth. Keegan-Joe, for his part, didn't seem terribly impressed. He stood before the newcomer, all bulk and muscle with his sword at his side, looking calm and ready. It was the face of a man about to put a pup down, show some punks who was boss. It was the face of a man without fear. You the boss here? The newcomers Erza said, and the division members, who had been murmuring between themselves, quieted down. There was an ominous sense hovering over the courtyard. It was about to go down, and down it would go very soon, and nobody wanted to miss a moment of it. I am. Keegan Joe said lazily, cleaning his ear with a pinky. What of it? You're the boss, and if I kill you, that makes me the boss. 'Zat right? If you can even put a scratch on me. Keegan Joe said, blowing at his finger. But yeah. That's the way it works. I'm the fucking Kenpake, and if you can kill me, you own that title. He reached for his sword, pulled it out, and a determined frown formed on his face. But if ya think I'll let ya have it, you're fucking insane. I'll yell yeah that much. Give it your best shot. I'll hack you to little bits and send 'em all back to Zaraki, just so they know what happens with people who fuck with me. That's the spirit. Zaraki said, grinning a wide, predatory grin, showing off the kind of teeth that made Erza think of a shark. Well, I ain't one for speeches. And with that, Kenpake charged, laughing maniacally, his great sword held in just the one hand. Not a man for speeches, indeed. Keegan Joe blocked the first hit, and head-butted Zaraki. The savage of a man reeled for the fraction of a second, and kept going, slashing like a madman, not hindered even by a little. Keegan Joe blocked twice, thrice, and attempted to slam the hilt of his sword into Zaraki's gut. But in an instant, Kenpake had cut him savagely, from shoulder to hip, no, from shoulder and far down into his chest, stopping just above his stomach. Keegan Joe let out a shocked gargle, and sunk down to one knee, desperately clutching his sword. His sword arm had been cut, he could not lift it. Grinding his teeth, he grabbed at Zaraki's dirty kimono with his one working arm, looking at him with furious defiance, grunting with pain. Good spirit. Zaraki said, and took a step back, and cut him across the neck once. Pity you're a shit fighter. Keegan Joe let out the last noise he'd ever make, a small cough as his last breath left him, and fell to the side. A pool of blood formed around him, growing larger and larger. Erza let out a long, hard gasp. She hadn't been close with the captain per se, she hadn't thought of him as a close friend, a precious person, but he had been her commander, and by and large he was a good man. He had been a good man. And now he was no more. She looked around her, desperate to see somebody else in the same state of shock as her, to know that she was not alone. And around her, everyone looked uncertain. Some looked as shocked as she, some nodded approvingly, grins on their faces, some just stood there with blank expressions, and the silence was complete. And for at least a full minute, everyone stared, all quiet, while Zaraki stood there, looking pleased as Keegan Joe's corpse bled, dyeing the courtyard red. Then, Ikeku stepped up from out the ring, threw Keegan Joe's blood and stopped, right before the grinning, murderous newcomer. There was a rustle of whispers through the crowd, anxiousness, fear. I remember you. Zaraki said. Didn't I give you a thrashing once? Yeah, you did. Ikeku said, nodding. And now, you're my captain. Well, ain't I fancy as hell then? Zaraki said, chuckling. Everyone. Ikeku shouted, turning to face the crowd. Keegan Joe Kenpake is dead. And in accordance with our rules, the toughest rules, for the toughest division, this man here is now our captain. The Kenpake is dead. Long live the Kenpake. Live long. A division member cheered, and one more, and one after another until it seemed like everyone around did. Live long. Live long. Erza remained silent, though, looking down at the ground. That beast, standing there with his scars and his grin, was a killer, a murderer. He'd killed the captain in cold blood, on his knees, and he was being cheered for. This would never have stood in fairy tale, and though that was her past, her principles were not so changed that she could tolerate being subordinate to a killer. There was a meeting almost immediately after, as soon as Keegan Joe's bloody corpse had been cleaned away, all division members getting to know their new captain. Some looked afraid, hesitant, but all too many looked eager, or worst of all, indifferent. Erza did not come. She stood still, watching the bloody spot where Keegan Joe had fallen, as everyone walked past it. She saw just one more soldier, standing there staring at it like herself. Itchy nose, she recalled a seventh seat. He killed him. He mumbled, and Erza realized he wasn't talking to anybody, just voicing his despair to the universe. He did. Erza said, loud enough to make herself heard. She clenched her fists hard, her nails digging into her palms. He killed him, Itchy Nose said, a blank look in his eyes, and nobody cares. There wasn't much else to say to that. Erza slowly walked up to the pool of blood, already drying in the heat, and got down on one knee before it, putting a hand in it, as if to make her memory real, that Keegan Joe had been real, had lived and led them. Rest in peace, Captain, she mumbled. She was unsure if there was an afterlife after the afterlife. That seemed kind of silly, but paying her respects was the least she could do. Rest in peace and sleep well. You did your best, and you saved many lives. Goodbye. Erza was not eloquent, not poetic, and that short tribute was all she could manage. Her palm red with her captain's blood, she stood up. She would not stay here. This was not home. She had felt at home here. It had been like her old guild, in some ways a laid-back approach to life, a rowdy, energetic tone, but this was not how home had been, and it could not be her home. No, home was long gone, and she had to stop acting like she could reconstruct it. She had to make her own home, somewhere where people weren't murdered for their position. Out of this division. She quit the same day. Yumi Chika signed the papers, but nobody really seemed to care. The division launched into celebration for their new captain, and out she slipped, unnoticed. The only one who saw her walk out, carrying a bag of what few personal belongings she had, was Ikeku. He gave her a short look, nodded at her, and walked back to the festivities, and that was that. He had been a friend to her, still was, but something new had happened between them. She had seen a new side to him, and she didn't like it. And so it came to pass that Erza stood at the Central Division Administration Office, the hub of desk jobs in the GODI, looking at different division papers. The request for a transfer had been approved without much fuss, probably because of the reputation 11th had, but she was expected to choose a division before the end of the day, preferably within the hour, and she hadn't a clue what she wanted to choose. She had already excluded divisions 2, 4, and 12. The first was a squad of spies and professional murderers, the second were supplies, logistics and medical aid, and the third were specialized towards scientific findings, and none of those things suited her. Division 1 wasn't open for application recruitment only, as it was the senior division. That left divisions 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. She could always choose at random, she supposed, although she rather wouldn't. She wanted action, and she wanted a commander she could trust. What was it she remembered about those captains? Kiraku Shunsui was supposedly a lazy bum and a ladies' man, but was honest and fair. Yukatake Jushiro was a good man through and through, she had been taught, but his health was poor. And Division 5 was headed by Aizen Saushik, her old mentor. Division 5 didn't sound so bad, did it? Erza reached for the papers for Division 5, and had almost grabbed it when she was interrupted. Sorry, came a woman's voice from behind, but do you know where I can deliver these? My captain sent me with this paperwork, and I never come here dash. The voice went dead quiet as Erza turned around to face the newcomer, and she dropped the papers she'd been holding to the floor, her mouth wide open. Erza, for her part, felt no less shocked. Standing still for what felt like an eternity, she blinked, trying to reassure herself that she was not dreaming, that she was still awake. Before her stood Lysina Strauss, long-dead member of Fairy Tail, sister to Elfman and Myra Jane, wearing the full garb of a Shinigami. She looked a little older, and had a small scar on her cheek, but it was Lysina. Oh my god, Lysina mumbled. You, oh my god, it's you. Erza said nothing, and stepped forward, pulling Lysina almost violently into a bear hug. She could feel tears almost forming in her eyes, as she held Lysina to her chest. Lysina had been a friend, not the closest of friends but a friend nonetheless, but at this point she'd have been overjoyed to see even the least friendly of guild members. She held her close, and only stopped when Lysina made muffled noises, choking under Erza's grip. A little embarrassed, she let her go. Wow, Lysina mumbled, rubbing her ribs, I think you almost broke something there. But are you real? Erza said, touching Lysina's face with her hand, palming her cheek, her other hand touching Lysina's shoulder, all to reassure herself that it wasn't a dream. Are you really real? Really here? Yes, I'm real. Lysina said, and giggled as she gently removed Erza's hands, taking them in her own. I'm real. And, my goodness, so are you. What happened to you? Big fight, sacrificed myself for the others, got sent to the afterlife. Erza said dismissively. But. Wow, how are you here? How all this time dash? Well, I got sent on too, Lysina said, in a gentle, happy tone. And after half a year or so, I got recruited. I did good in the academy, and now, well, I'm 5th seat. Well done. Erza said happily, still feeling overwhelmed, impossibly elated. I was dash. So, how long have you been here? Lysina said, before Erza could begin stuttering incoherently. You must have been here for years, if you went through the academy. Yes, years. Erza said, nodding. I've been in active service for about half a year now. She got a strange look, as something struck her. Wait, how come you never saw me before? It's been a long time, and... Well, the Godii is a large place. Not that large. And, well, I got very well known after my first mission. The massacre, that was you? The lone survivor. Yes, well, not lone, there was one more. Oh Erza, that's terrible. Lysina said, squeezing her hands emphatically. I heard about it by rumor, although I didn't get any names. How? Well, to be honest. I was chosen for a dedicated Terminator group. I've been out on a hunting campaign for the last 2 years. I only got back last week. She smiled. I was so proud my vice captain chose me and 6 others to cleanse an infestation, no matter what. And we did it and not one of us died. That would explain it, I guess. Erza mumbled. But still. I thought I was alone for so long. I lost the friends I made, and I just left 11th Division because of, well, that's a whole other mess. And now, you're here. She choked up, not really knowing how to word her feelings. I know, Lysina said, smiling knowingly. I know. There was a quiet for a little while, not an awkward silence, just the two of them looking at each other, 2 friends thrilled to be reunited. So. Lysina said, after a while, you left 11th Division. And I'm looking for a new one. Where are you? 10th Division. Lysina said proudly. Our captain's a goof-off, but he's a good man who does what's needed when it counts. Let me just get the right papers, then. I'm joining there. All for me. It's all I need. It's not like I was set on going anywhere in particular. Your captain's a good man, you said? Yes. Lysina nodded happily. Before long, Erza had filed the papers, gotten a stamp of approval, and headed towards 10th Division, arm in arm with Lysina. Sheba Ishain turned out to be everything his reputation had made him out to be. Lysina led her directly to the office of the 10th Division, where the captain was leaning back in a chair, a busta woman wearing a vice-captain's badge chiding him. She was bustier than Erza herself, she noted. Good, maybe now she'd get less stares. And I told you, those papers were due the day before yesterday. And the mission reports are a whole week late. Your subordinates can be bothered to write them down, so why can't you be bothered to look them over and give them approval? All right, the captain murmured, shrugging. Get off my back, will ya? Oh, look. He said, turning to Lysina, seeming glad about the distraction. My cute 5th seat is back, with a new recruit. Right? Please tell me she is. He grinned. She is. Lysina nodded. She's an old friend from when I was alive, even. Really now? Ishain said, raising an eyebrow. That's unusual, and I know of her, too. Erza Scarlet, is it? Yes, sir, Erza mumbled. You did good work in 11th as a hunter, I heard. Keegan Joe told me, rest his soul, poor bastard, you did good. Thank you. Erza mumbled, not sure what to say. Well, let's get you started. What rank did you have? 16th seat. Ishain looked at her, from tip to toe, giving her a knowing look. 16th seat? That won't do, waste of potential, keeping you that low. How many hunts did you complete? Erza scratched her head, not quite remembering the exact number this moment. At least 40, sir. Most of them successful. Well, no 16th seed should be able to do that, by herself or in charge of a squad. How's 12th seed sounding? Erza nodded, feeling as happy as she felt surprised. Yes, sir, that will do. Thank you. Keep it up, and you'll keep moving up, simple as that, Ishain said contentedly. Captain, the vice-captain said, sighing irritatedly, don't think this will get you out of work. You gave her a rank, and the papers are easily signed, now get back to doing your job. This is my vice-captain, the charming Matsumoto Rangiku. Ishain said, gesturing to his bust, a second in command. She's very pretty, and dash. Flattery's not working either. Matsumoto said indifferently. Get to work. The captain sighed. You know, Scarlet, you may regret climbing up the ladder. Being at the top is all work and no play. With an overly dramatic gesture of despair, he sat himself down behind his desk, and signed Erza's papers. Well, that should settle it. I'll let Strauss here find you a room, and you'll be sharing 12th seat with 2 more people. You report for duty tomorrow. Take today to get a feel for the division. Yes, sir. Erza said, not quite sure what to make of this man. Paperwork. Now. Matsumoto urged, smacking the captain over the head. All right. All right. You vicious, heartless harpy. The words were harsh, but his tone was light, and Erza got the feeling this was a common routine for the two. I'll get you a room. Listen, said, smiling. The captain has lots of important things to do. Don't remind me, he groaned, staring down a pile of papers. Well, Scarlet, welcome to 10th, where you can't swing a sword without writing a report on it. With that, Erza let Lysina lead her out of there. This was strange. The captain appeared childish, less than responsible, but this wasn't the 11th division, though, she reminded herself just being strong wouldn't make you a leader. And appearances could be deceiving. And even so, a goofy, irresponsible leader would be an improvement over what she had left behind. As they walked and talked, Erza learned that Lysina had made quite a name for herself in her division, and by all appearances she was stronger and more accomplished by quite a measure than Erza herself. She had risen far in the ranks as an exterminator of hollows and leader of men. It was amazing to see how much she had grown since she had departed Fairy Tail, and a little bit strange to call her senior. But senior she was, and Erza didn't mind it. She was more experienced, and had better control of her Ryotsu. Sometimes, when life closed a door it opened window, and this time, Erza felt, a huge, shining gate had been opened. 11th had been a home to her for a while, a place where she had earned her position, but compared to standing next to an old friend, yes, in a way, the new Kenpaki's arrival had been a blessing in disguise. The future, finally, looked a little brighter. With a new captain, and friends at her side, she had reason to move forward at last. She found her place in 10th Division, with a room of her own better furnished than anything she had had in 11th, and in the following days, she slowly started to accept the deaths she had seen, the brutality and flaw of Godai law, and one day, as she sat meditating by her sword, it happened. Once again, she stood by the great mountain, surrounded on all sides by a storm of sand and dust, and once again she began climbing. Nimbly, she avoided pitfalls, carefully choosing only the best rocks, twigs, and roots to hang onto, keeping her balance perfectly. Hundreds and hundreds of times she had done this, and she had found an aptitude for it. Today felt different, though. After having climbed for 2 hours or so it felt, she had no way of telling time. Here she looked down, realizing that the ground below her was far, far down, further than she had ever seen before. She took a deep breath, feeling that breathtaking sensation of being so far, far up, and of having come so much further without even realizing it. And when she looked up, resolutely continuing her climb, she could see the dust storm lessening, a light shining through it. The air got clearer, and as Erza scaled a steep mountain wall, desperately digging her fingers into cracks and crevices, her feet struggling to find something to rest on, the light got clearer still. Finally heaving herself over the wall's edge, she stopped for a second to catch her breath, half lying down. It had been an exhausting climb. But she allowed herself only a second, before forcing herself to her feet again. Her arms and hands ached with exertion, her feet and legs were sore, but she wouldn't stop now, not after having come this far. Standing tall, she looked forward, and saw a narrow path, made out of uneven, roughly cut stones lying flat in the ground, on a messy-looking field of half-withered grass, leading towards that tree, that husk of a tree she had been climbing towards for so long. Almost sprinting she would have run, had she not been so exhausted. Erza marched forward, gritting her teeth. She was almost there now, almost there. I am coming, nothing's stopping me now, I. Walking straight and fast, Erza almost slammed into the tree's trunk face first. Stopping for a minute, breathing heavily as she closed her eyes, taking in the feeling of hard bark against her skin, she rested herself against the tree, pulling at it with her hands. After recovering, she stood up straight. It was right there, before her eyes. A withered tree, unlike any she had ever seen, with only patches of bark on its naked trunk. It was a husk of a tree, frail and weak-looking, withered and dead. "Where are you?" Erza said uncertainly. "Where are you?" She had come so far. She had failed and got up again over and over so many times now, and today, she had climbed all the way. So where was it? Where was her sword? Damn it! She swore. So impatient, as always. The voice echoed across all of reality, through her head, her body, the very fibers of her being. "What?" she said confusedly. "Where are you? Show yourself." "And why should I do that? I beat your challenge. I earned the right to know." "You know already, impetuous one. You need only call my name out." "I don't. If I did, I would have already." "With great patience, in the face of adversity, you conquered my challenge. Think to yourself, what does it take to be knocked down 1,000 times, and get up 1,001? A soul of steel," Erza said resolutely. "A soul of steel." And realization hit her. She had known, all along, just as well as you know your toes, your fingers, your mind, only hidden in her unconscious. "Come out," she cried, "Tetsu no Tama." The tree begun to crack, and Erza realized the light that had shone on her before came from there alone. Big lines ran up its trunk, pure light, and splinters begun flying in every direction. With a mighty thunderclap, the tree shattered, showering her with light. Erza put an arm over her eyes, shielding herself from the overwhelming force that was bathing the mountain in its light. Around her, the dust storm was blown away, and as Erza's eyes adjust, she saw the landscape change. The mountain grew bright, to a pleasant gray, with green plants and trees running down it, an inviting, neatly laid path going from its bottom to its top. But that was inconsequential compared to her excitement. She wanted to see what her blade looked like. With cheer and wonder in her mind, she looked through the light, and little by little, it became clear. What she saw was a figure in ornate, brass armor, magnificent pauldrons lying over its shoulders. It was covered in metal from tip to toe, standing a head taller than herself, and its face was hidden to her not quite clear, light radiating from its very being to the point where details were hard to see. "So that is you," she said, smiling. "I am the piece of your soul that always was." The Zanpakuta said, its voice bombastic and prideful. "I am your lust for battle, I am your desire to protect, I am your strength of arm and depth of wit. I am born of you yet, I am not you. I am your power. And will you lend me your power?" So I will," the spirit said, nodding, but not unconditionally. "I will show no tolerance for cowardice, weakness, or indecision. Show me that, and I shall withdraw myself until you prove yourself worthy. But show me courage, show me bravery and strength, and I shall gladly lend you all that I am. And in your darkest hour of need, you shall find that my power grows to match what we face." "Good," Erza said, nodding. "I'll make sure not to behave cowardly. See that you do not," the spirit said haughtily. "But now, Erza Scarlet, you have achieved enough for one day. Remember me, speak to me as often as you can, that we may become one." The world around her begun to crumble, and Erza realized she would soon wake up. "I'll remember," she said cheerily. "I'll remember that, no matter what. Then until next time. The spirit cried. And with that, the world around them collapsed. To your left. From below. Go, go, go. Erza dodged the sweep of a hollow's claw just barely with a well-timed shunpo, heeding Listena's warning. The two of them were out, hunting two huge class hollows by themselves, and it was almost like old times, only the stakes now were not collecting jewels for a guild, and the monsters looked different. Right now, far up in the sky above a thick forest, somewhere in the world she wasn't sure where Erza was facing a strong, vicious beast, surely over 60 feet long, tail and all, with a segmented, scaly serpent-like body, with 3 pairs of clawed legs moving with vicious precision. The monster just barely missed her as she slipped away, but instantly caught sight of her again as she reappeared 100 or so feet back in the air, instantly charging at her, almost slithering through the air. It snapped at her with its huge, malodorous jaws, and Erza stepped back. Clawed arms cut at her, over and over, and Erza found herself driven back, only barely dodging and parrying its attacks in time. It was fast and furious, and very strong, old and experienced, most likely, and not nearly as arrogant as many of the hollows she had slain in the past. Though it wasn't penetrating her defense, she was being driven back and, she knew, if this kept up then eventually she'd tire, slip up, and then all might be lost. The monster was bigger, stronger, and would definitely outlast her in a game of endurance. What are you waiting for? Listena barked, she herself battling a cat-like monster with blade appendages on its back. Finish it off quickly and help me. Working on it. Erza shouted back. I dash. She was interrupted, as the monster's tail lashed out, slamming into her side and sending her flying down towards the ground. As quickly as she could, she took control of her momentum, slowing her descent through the air. She stopped just short of the forest line. The monster was grinning at her, cackling slowly, spreading its 6 arms as if to invite her to come at it again. Erza huffed. Well, no time better to use it. Holding up her sword, fire in her eyes, she cried, strike, Tetsu no Tama. Her Ryotsu surged, and she was filled with the most amazing feeling, a soul within her soul acting in tandem with her, releasing more power than she ever could have before. This was the first time she'd used it in real combat, but it was well tested, and she knew its strength. Her sword had grown longer, and straightened completely, its guard changing to a simple cross, so like her old kind of sword, and electric power crackled around it. With a determined look in her eye, she leapt upwards, against the awaiting monster, with furious speed. It saw her coming, every step of the way, but even then, the fury of her assault surprised it, as she slammed into it, cutting at it with one furious strike after another. Using its arms, the beast blocked her strikes, but now, she was matching its speed, even surpassing it. Feinting, she struck forward, dodged under one of its claws, and struck into its softer belly, driving the sword into the hilt. The monster screeched, but Erza wasn't quite done yet. Dragon strike! She roared, and a torrent of electrical energy ravaged the monster's body. It screamed and spasmed, and Erza brutally twisted the sword. Finally, its arms came for her, but Erza's blade dissolved as she used a shunpo to move away. 2 new blades, lighter and shorter, appeared in her hands, and quickly she attacked, mercilessly cutting at the monster with furious speed. It could not keep up, desperately trying to fend her off, but gash after gash appeared on its arms, until one by one, Erza severed them from its body until only 2 remained. The hollow roared with pain and anger, and raised its head to strike at her, like a snake. Erza looked at it with a gaze cold and steely, and her blades changed again, forming a big, bulky double-edged battle axe. It was ornate, darkly gray, and it looked grim and cruel, and Erza raised it high as the hollow's head came down. With perfect precision, she cut down hard just as the monster's head came to bite her, and felt the heavy, hard impact as her weapon's edge crushed through its skull. The monster roared one last time, and instantly began dissolving into billions of tiny spiritual particles. Quickly, Erza looked to Listena, readying herself to charge in, but it seemed needless. Listena was trashing her target, brutalizing it with a barrage of Kido. It was bleeding, one of its arms ripped off, and Listena dashed forward, rapidly cutting it to pieces, stroke after stroke, until her blade found its mark and pierced the mask. The hollow shrieked, and disintegrated as well. Good work. Erza said, walking closer. No problem. Lysina said nonchalantly. She was covered in blood, sprayed all over her shiakusho, her face, her hands, and she looked eerily calm as she wiped her sword clean and sheathed it. It had been a brutal fight, but she was perfectly calm, having moved with the confidence and ease of a veteran. She had changed, Erza thought, become a very different person in many regards. It reminded her of herself. You're a strong one, Scarlet, Ikeko said, taking a swig from his sake. The two of them had sparred again, and the score was 17-10. Erza was learning fast, and she had the endurance to keep going. All in all, it was good practice. Ikeko was a vicious fighter, all experience. You're strong. How many extermination hunts you been to at this point? 17. Erza said. 14 kills so far. I heard I might get promoted if I keep this up. Ikeko nodded. No doubt on that. The captain rewards those who are strong of arm and put it to good use. No politics, no bullshit, just being strong gets you up. It's what I like best about this place. Erza said, leaning back against the wall. That said, Ikeko said thoughtfully, taking another swig. That said, what? That said, you sure you don't like the hunts too much? Erza blinked. What do you mean? I done seen my share of new recruits in my day, and most do go on hunts with senior members. Part of what you do when you're green. Most don't go on 17 hunts in less than 2 months, though. 4 or 5, with a couple of kills here and there. You really took to slaying, didn't you? It's what I'm good at. He nodded. You sure are. I sense a but there. But, he said, nodding, you kill real vicious like, and you're bloody reckless too. The officers like it, 'cause they see eagerness and strength, but I wonder if that's really it. Are you criticizing me for being good at my job? We're Shinigami, we exist to kill hollows. Ikeko gave her a look. Never thought I'd be the one to complain about somebody being too violent, but strictly speaking, we Shinigami exist to guide lost souls to the afterlife. Strictly speaking, the whole sword fighting thing's a bit of an afterthought, something we do because we got no choice. Don't get me wrong, I love it to bits. He said, and paused, taking another swig. But that's not why Shinigami exist. And you, he said, pointing at her, you ain't a thug like me. You're better. You're the kind of person who should remember this. I don't understand. Erza said confusedly. I hunt. I kill. I do my best. You hunt, you purify. Ikeko said, emphasizing the last word. We deliver the souls of the dead, and the souls of hollows too. Personally, I don't care, I just love fighting, but it's an important thing to keep in mind. You hollows took a lot from you. That'd make anybody angry. Angry enough to go on hunt after hunt, killing them endlessly. So what? Erza said, almost angrily. Shouldn't we be angry? With what they are? Maybe we should. Ikeko said, shrugging. Maybe we shouldn't. I can tell you this much, though I seen angry men before, doing what you do. They make kick-ass fighters, but they all die early deaths. They kill more than anybody else, but live shorter. That's not you. You're a fucking paragon, you actually care about right and wrong, and that makes you different from most people here. And that's why I'm saying this, not because I care about right or wrong, but because you do, because it's who you are. And if you are not careful, you could lose sight of who you are, and one day you wake up and you can't recognize the body you see in a mirror. Erza frowned. Ikeko took yet another swig. Or maybe I'm just drunk and talking shit. But remember this, next time you hunt, we don't do it for us. We do it 'cause if we don't, people will die in the world of the living, or in the soul society. That's why. Whatever. Erza mumbled. It sounded like such nonsense. Who was he to tell her what she should and shouldn't do, or think? But somewhere, deep inside her, a chord had been struck. The monsters they had slain were strong, far above Erza's measly 12th seat's level of play. It was strange to think of a rank 12 as measly, but in truth, she had long surpassed, in terms of sheer fighting ability and raw power, anything but the higher ranked single digits. She still sparred with Ikeko at a mostly even level, and he had ended up being bumped up to third seat. She was reaching strength worthy of the elite, and she hadn't expected any less. Not because she had arrogantly expected to be the best of the best, but because power had always come easy for Erza, more so than most of all people she knew in the Godi. And so, when her efforts and brutally efficient record was noticed and Ishain promoted her to ninth seat, she was glad, but not overwhelmed or surprised. Demonstrating Shikai was no small feat in itself, and using it to the effect she did was apparently a job well done. The Godi was a difficult place, where most power rested with its upper crust, and Erza knew that if she wanted to make a difference for those who needed it most, she had to come as far up the ladder as possible. She had no choice but to keep advancing, keep growing stronger. The one area she was lacking in was experience, especially in administration. She knew all about destroying, but managing her subordinates, handing out orders, filling and filing the right forms, writing mission reports, that was a little alien to her. Which, she supposed, was why she was ninth seat and not much higher. Yet, once again, they were Terminators, hunters of the wicked, fighting like angels of death to protect mankind. Put less poetically, they Lysina, Erza, and a squad of highly ranked officers of their division had been dispatched, once more, to hunt a pack of hollows that had been terrorizing part of the living world. It was in a city, and Erza found herself fascinated with this world. It was nothing like Edela's, great buildings, impossibly tall, stretched towards the sky, and metal wagons raced across incredibly wide, black streets all by themselves and with not a trace of magic to be sensed. Had steam engines come that far in this world? She made a note to investigate later, when there was time. Scarlet. No time for daydreaming. Lysina barked, and Erza snapped out of her pondering thoughts. Lysina had become tough, and she took leadership seriously. Hollows materializing. One of the squad members cried. Half a mile from here, dead ahead. Everybody stick together. Lysina cried. Assume formations. I'm taking point. Scarlet, you take my back. As one, the group formed an arrow-like formation, with Lysina at the front. The hollows were many otherwise. They wouldn't have tried attacking. They were survivors, not warriors, and survivors did not take fights they believe they could not win. That's a lot, Erza commented, holding her blade out. Think we got in over our heads? She didn't, but talking was as good a way as any to keep oneself calm. Just watch, Erza, Lysina said, holding her blade at the ready. Raising it high, she cried, Rend, Ragin. Lysina's riot surged, and the air crackled with thunderous electricity. A pair of three-bladed battle claws had replaced Lysina's sword, one sitting firmly on each of her hands, blue lightning coursing between each blade. Not wasting another second, Lysina charged forward, and Erza followed behind, as did the other squad members. She made ready to release her sword if necessary, but, it turned out, necessary was not what it was. As Lysina charged with furious speed, a field of lightning expanded around her, and she sped far ahead of her teammates. The lightning struck the hollows, shocking and stunning the ones Lysina didn't cut into herself, and she had no mercy on the ones that were in her path, her claws, rending and maiming anything they could get at, moving faster, almost, than the eye could follow. Quickly, Erza and her squad mates cut into the disorganized hollow pack, dispatching one after another with quick blows to their masks. It was almost too easy, Erza thought as she dodged a lame attempt at clawing her, and following it with a quick thrust into its mask. Yes, this was easy. And all because Lysina had grown as much as she did. Before long, all hollows 14 in total were done for, none of the Shinigami having taken so much as a flesh wound. Erza sheathed her sword, huffing. Hunts were for glory Hogwarts, they said, but was this really glory? Good work, Terminators. Lysina said, her Shikai dissipating. Let's return to base and see where our next deployment is. One hunt down, and you're already looking for the next. Erza said, smiling. You sure turned industrious. Is that a problem, Scarlet? No. Erza said, letting her smile turn to a grin. I love it. But you've come a long way, haven't you? Weird, having to call you senpai. I'm the same. Lysina said, shrugging. And at the same time, I'm different. We all change. When you think about it, We're all different people throughout our lives. And that's okay, that's good. You've got to keep moving, so long as you remember all the people you used to be. Don't you think? Sure. Erza nodded. Listener really had come a long way. Leadership had changed her, and Erza decided cautiously that it was for the better. Let's go, then. Listener said, opening the portal. Back home, for new orders. Yes, back home. Erza said happily, and followed through. Home. Well, she had found a home of sorts now, and it was good enough. Wherever friends were, you could make a home to be sure. Check the description for the links to the author.